You must have thought I was joking.
Sorry.
I'm like, oh, man. Oh, were you? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. It is 6:30, and I'll call our work session to order. And our work sessions are very informal, so for those who are listening and those in the audience. And the first item on the agenda is the update of the city logo and entrance monument plan review. And presenting this evening from our staff is Marty Dahl, our communications coordinator, and Steve Albrecht, our public works director. So,
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As you know from your agenda, Steve and I kind of have a two-part presentation here, talking about logos and the entrance monuments, two things that are somewhat related to each other. I'm going to do my portion of the presentation first, and if you don't like what I have to say, Steve had nothing to do with it. Thank you, Marty. So don't hold that against him in the second part of the presentation. I've got a brief presentation and a few slides to go over, but before I do that, I want to give you just a little bit of a history on why we're here talking about the logo right now. This is something that really came up when we started talking about the monument piece. When staff was directed to look into doing entrance monuments on the main roads into Burnsville, we really got to thinking, these are going to be pieces where the city logo is literally going to be set in stone for a long time, potentially 30, 40 years or more if they hold up. So we wanted to really think about, if we're going to ever look at updating the city logo, now's probably the time to think about it, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of these big community identification pieces out there that are going to have the logo on them, and it's going to be harder to do in the future. So staff asked council if they'd be in favor of exploring this logo refresh, and we were given direction to go ahead and do that, and that's why we're here before you tonight. In addition to a bunch of research on how the logo is currently being used and kind of how it would work to do an update if the council so chose, we also employed the services of local designer Greg Preslichka of Preslichka Studios in Savage to give us some options or some ideas of how the logo could transition. He's done a number of corporate and government logos in the past. He did the City of Savage's logo update. He's done things for General Mills, a very good portfolio. And so with that, we came up with a few options that are before you this evening. And what we're really looking for you after this presentation is some direction as to how you'd like us to proceed. After tonight's presentation, you'll have a few options. You could, which could include choosing one of the three options that are provided and asking staff to develop an implementation plan of updating this logo. Or you could look at these logos and say, hey, we like what we've got and we want to maintain the status quo and we don't want to do anything different. That's always an option as well. This is really just a purpose of discussion for these things. So I will go over my slides now. As some history, some of you may or may not know, the current logo was actually derived during the bicentennial celebration in 1976. It was by a design contest, I believe, held by the Burnsville JCs that created the logo that we're using now. And the city began using it in the early 1980s, which means it's been there for about 30 plus years. And here's just some examples. You're all very familiar with how the logo looks. So why consider an update now? In some cases, an entity might look at updating its logo because it's looking to change its identity. I want to emphasize that that's not why Burnsville would be doing it. That was not part of this project and not part of our research. We're very proud of the identity that Burnsville has, and Burnsville, in fact, has done a great job of branding itself using its existing logo, and we wouldn't want to undo all that hard work by completely going in another direction, and I think that's evident by the samples that you've been provided there. So really, why would we be looking at doing it? To be honest, the logo is a little visually outdated. It's 30 years old. It was developed in the late 70s. It has that 70s look and feel. We'd really be looking more for a logo evolution, keeping that history and imagery in place, and while trying to keep our identity from being stale and being looked at as something that looks old, feels old. It's something that private companies do a lot. You'll see logo revisions from the Pepsis and the Cokes and the Apples of the world every 3, 4, 5 years. And they're not changing their logo, but they're evolving their logo into a more modern look. Obviously government doesn't need to do that with the same frequency as private companies, but it might not hurt to look at every 30 years or so. And as I mentioned before, another reason why we're looking at it now is we've got what I'm coining community identification projects such as monument signage. The park and facility entrance signages are in need of some updating, and there'll be pieces that will be replaced over the next few years that will really have that logo prominent. So we'll literally and figuratively be set in stone for a number of years, which is why we're looking at doing this now. So you might be asking yourself, if we change our logo, isn't that going to cost a lot of money? I mean, we've got a lot of places where the logo is right now. To try and ease that, we know there's no appetite to spend a bunch of money to take things down just for the sake of changing the logo, or changing things just for the sake of changing the logo. Staff would be recommending a long-term implementation plan, which, as I'll discuss in a minute, does come with its challenges, but is more of a cost-effective solution, whereas rather than replacing something to replace the logo, you'd replace the logo as you're replacing the sign, equipment, infrastructure, et cetera. So it would be something that's being replaced in its normal replacement schedule, and we'd slowly update the logo on those items as we went along. Again, pros, cost-effective. Some of the challenges or cons is that we'll have 2 logos that'll be in circulation for a while. There are some things that could be done almost immediately with little or no cost, where the logo could be changed. A lot of our electronic stuff could be done instantly. Our website, social media, email signatures, those kinds of things can be done easily. Our print publications like our Burnsville Bulletin, the Performing Arts Center season guide brochures, those can be done with every print, changed every print, easy to do. Even office supplies like business cards, letterheads, envelopes, and bills and forms and those types of things are only ordered 1 to 2 years supply in advance. So I know we're on the end of our envelopes and letterhead and ready for an order now, where we'd be able to order things with a new logo on. Some of those long-term replacement pieces, unfortunately, the water towers were just repainted. So the logo is going to be on the water towers for a long time. That's not uncommon in communities. I'll use Edina as an example. Edina's had its new logo for at least 10 years, and they've still got at least 1, maybe 2 of their water towers in town that have the old logo. It's kind of the territory because you don't get up and paint those things all that often. But just so you're aware, it would be up there for a while. Vehicle decals would be another one that would be a longer term replacement. Talking to our fleet department, it would probably be 10 to 12 years before the entire fleet was replaced and those logos were changed. The decals really aren't all that expensive to change out. It's the labor costs that are involved with bringing things in and changing it. So again, to be cost effective, we'd be looking at only changing those when fleets changed out. The park facility and entrance signs, as you're probably aware, are in need of some updating and changing, and that schedule is to be determined, but it would most likely be a longer-term replacement schedule. It'd be hard to replace all 76 or more of those signs quickly. And then there are a few things that don't have a replacement schedule that you might, you'd consider either leaving the old logo on or would involve some added costs outside of a normal replacement schedule. We wanted to make sure that we were open and upfront about those things as well. The biggest one being the large City Hall logo on the building, the one that's right outside here. That would be something that probably wouldn't be replaced but for changing the logo, and there would be some cost involved in that. The electronic outdoor message board on Nicollet has a logo up on top, but I was actually just outside this afternoon with our facilities department, and where that logo is actually just a plastic sheeting that pops off and could be replaced. So actually less intensive than I thought it was going to be. It's not like the whole message board would need to be replaced to change that logo. The banners on the heart of the city, obviously those will eventually be replaced due to weather and wear and tear, but they do have the logo. It's very small, not all that visible. I don't know that that's a very prominent showing of the logo, and probably wouldn't hurt that they're out there for a while. Adopt a street signs and other street signs are things that really don't have a replacement schedule unless they're knocked down or wrecked or worn that have our logo on it. And then the golf course has a few things like its T signs and street signs that are a little more permanent too. There'd be a little bit of a challenge in how we would incorporate that with the Burnham Wood Golf Course because they do have some of those permanent-esque structures. So without further ado, you've seen them already in your background, but I'll go through the 3 options that have been provided to us by our designer and talk just briefly about each of them. Option number 1, you'll notice, is very close to our existing logo. Here's two different variations, and then here's the two side by side. Really sticking with the same shape, same structures, updating colors a little bit, updating just a little bit, modernizing that a little bit, but very close to our existing logo. I don't think there'd be any brand confusion if you saw these two side by side. But again, very close. Option number 2 is still sticking with the theme of the trees and the water, except it's presented a little bit differently. Rather than the water along the bottom, this is more of a
Hurricane.
drop or hurricane.
And leaves.
Yes. So
Tornado.
they're taking that concept of the coniferous and the deciduous tree and expanding upon that, going a little bit farther away from the existing logo, but still keeping those same images in place. Here's that logo side by side with our current logo. And then the last option is the farthest from the 3 away from our current logo. It's still, again, maintaining that same imagery, the waters, the coniferous and the deciduous trees in the water, presenting it a little bit different way. And here would be those 2 logos side by side as well. And so, as I mentioned, this is really about discussion, trying to get council's thoughts on what they'd like to do or what they'd like to see done with the logo. So I'll open it up for any questions.
We'll do that, the questions, council, questions? Thoughts, comments?
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
Everybody.
This is artwork, so this is
Yeah.
not thoughts, this is all opinion.
It is.
Very
Well, thoughts
subjective.
are
Yeah,
opinions.
it's very subjective.
Yeah.
And I will say,
what do we want
subjectively,
it to be?
subjectively, I don't care for number 2. That's the one I really don't care for. And practically, I think I prefer number 1 because it's a little easier segue or transition from the old logo to the new. So I don't think it would be quite as visually jarring if we started to implement that. And I like it. I mean, other than that, I just like it. I mean, I do prefer that over number 3, although I don't object to number 3, but
It's quite a bit.
I like this one better, yeah. So that's my opinion.
Okay, Bill?
As usual, I agree with Mary, but part of the reason.
No, you don't always agree with me.
Just kidding. So as, part of the reason I agree is that to me, an evergreen tree does not really reflect Burnsville. I like the idea that tree and water reflects Burnsville, but I just can't see that we're like a Christmas tree looking city. That's not I don't see a lot of white pines or Douglas, different types of trees. So for me, it's both transition and what more accurately reflects the city, and it's generic trees and water. And for me, it'd be either 2 or 3 of number 1, and I don't know if there's a cost difference or not, but if there's not a cost difference, I don't know whether you have the city of versus just Burnsville.
Oh, you mean in terms of the lettering?
Right.
And actually, this would be, we have a horizontal and a more square version of our current logo. We would maintain that with an updated logo if you chose to go that route. So it would really be, find that here. It would be both variations of it, both the vertical. There'd be instances where the horizontal version is used and instances where just
And
the square
I'd
version.
also just like to compliment the folks in the past that chose the previous one. I thought that was attractive. I mean, it well reflected the city, water and trees.
Well, actually, I like number 3. I like how it flows. It's kind of like moving forward or something. But the question to ask is, are we going to change our logo? I mean, we can talk about which ones we like, and the public can talk about which ones we like, but are we going to change the logo? I guess is the question.
Okay. Yeah? Okay.
From a graphical standpoint, number 3 to me is the most modern, most like newer logos. The asymmetrical swoop is almost, look around in almost every major brand, they've utilized that sort of design. It does, from a city standpoint, however, it does make it look like we're a windy or river city. We are a river city, but it's more about the lakes, not necessarily the river. So just from an appearance standpoint, I thought that was the most appealing. But I have to say that I look at our current logo, and it's amazing how much more you can like it when you compare it against other logos. I actually fell back on, I don't believe we should change it. I like our old one just fine. And I couldn't believe that I'd say that because I'm the one that likes branding and imaging and change. And I think all of these are good, but none of them are better than what we have. And so I wouldn't change just for change. And then I'd ask the question Dan asked, are we going to really go through with a change? So I think if we were going to make a change, it would have to be, I don't know, I'd have to look at other options or stay with what we have, because I think what we have is it's pretty darn good. I was floored when I expressed that to my wife, Gary. Said, suddenly I like what we have as good as any of these others.
And what did she say? Because she's in marketing.
She agrees.
She likes the.
Yeah,
Understand.
this is her area, as you may well know, and one looked a bit like a Christmas tree. This first thing in the middle one, and we agree. It was like, oh, we're not Christmas Town, USA, so that doesn't fit. The first one wasn't bad, but I'm not sure what kind of trees those are, but maybe that.
Ash.
Yeah, I don't know. It's that could probably be ash trees. That could probably be redone to be made into something a little less. That one struck me as complex. Remember, we had this discussion about why we got into this discussion, other than the fact that we're about to embark on monuments. We talked about this when we had the branding discussion, and we said, our current logo is kind of busy. We have too many trees sort of overlapping one another, and can we clean it up and simplify it? So the first one, to me, doesn't achieve the goal of cleaning it up and simplifying it as much as I might expect. And graphically, the most appealing is number 3. But I look at our current one, I say, there's nothing wrong with it, so I'm hard pressed to make a decision to change, to be honest with you, which is ironic for me.
I'm going to go back to 1970, and I think, Craig, I don't know if you remember that far back also when this competition that the JCs put in place, and I think it was a lot of young kids also who submitted, and back then. And the reason why the coniferous and deciduous trees was because Burnsville, as we were foresting our city, looked at both. And I know that Commissioner Workman is sitting here, and one of the things that we always talk about when Councilmember Charlotte Shover was here at the time was always to have winter greens, so that when we are in the winter time, you wanted to see green. So in our code and ordinance, we always have to have a mix of trees, both deciduous and coniferous, so that in the wintertime, there is green in the landscape.
Especially juniper bushes. Something that Councilman-
Only 25%.
So that's the reason with bringing both the coniferous and deciduous species of trees into the logo, and of course, we're a river city. And always when we're looking to the future and who are we don't want to, as Marty talked about, it's not about changing our brand or our image, it's about looking forward into the future. And we all look at our logo and we say, yes, it really looks good. It really defines who we are as a city in terms of our beginnings. When I first looked at it, I really liked 3. And what 3 does is bring together the coniferous and deciduous tree element of the city, and the water is lake and river. And that's about flowing. And if you look at what we did with MBTA and some of the logo with MBTA with the road, it has all of these much more softer appeal than the very rigid appeal of what we have. And so we look at those 2. Yes, 3 is much more of a departure from our original logo. But can you put up 1, please, Marty? Yeah, nobody liked 2. but one brings in both. But then again, what I saw there when I first saw it was it brought in, okay, we all said these were all open, the feminine and the masculine in the rigidness of the pine trees, and then the feminine in the curves of the, so it brought both elements together. So that, when I looked at that, I liked those aspects of number one. It was bringing both aspects of the hard edges and the softer edges together. So I think, okay, so Dan K., you're saying you don't think the logo should be changed?
Well, I'm happy with what we have. I've found myself happier with what we have after comparing it to these. But I'm with you. If we were to make a change, and if the consensus was this would be a good thing to do,
Yeah.
and we can update it,
Yeah.
then I would be more apt to go with 3 from a design standpoint.
Yeah.
That just happens to be one that I think is more modern looking.
Yeah.
This one looks more, number 1 looks more civic.
Yes.
3 looks more fashionable, trendy, it's modern, which is more the private sector
Yeah.
might go with a logo like that, where civic, cities tend to
Yeah.
kind of stay a little bit more of a civic look. But I think Burnsville, even though we are, we're not a new town, we have a lot of things that have been remade and renewed and maintained and kept modern. And we have a lot of over the next 20 years, the Minnesota River Quadrant will
And
see
that's-
lots of new change. And so I don't see anything wrong with number 3 from that standpoint, fitting kind of us going forward in our future.
And that's what I'm looking at, is the future. And how does that, Mary?
Dan, you used a word, though, that makes, it really identified my resistance to number 3. I didn't eliminate it, it was just my second choice, and that's the word trendy. I think that the way when we're doing something like this, we really should try to avoid being trendy, because we can't afford to paint water towers every
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not
every
sure.
time there's a trend. The other thing about that one is, honestly, I don't see that as water, I saw it as wind. Because the trees are bending, and that's how I see, I didn't get that as wind. I mean, it's lovely, it has a nice flowy thing, but it doesn't look very civic to me, and I thought it was wind.
Okay.
I got a similar feel, I think.
And you know what I'm
Chicago
suggesting?
one,
I think,
but-
you know what? If we're gonna change the logo, we ought to all be wild about it.
Well, go back
Can we
to
bring
one, because nobody is wild. Yes, and we're going to try to get to consensus. So let's first ask the question, are you more apt to change the logo as we look to the future, rather than trending to the future, using that word? Looking to the future, what would you look at? Would you like to change the logo?
I was in favor of
Yeah,
this,
because-
absolutely. I think
because when we-
this
in
could use some
February-
energy that is
Yeah.
lacking, and to me, it looks very dated. But I don't want to get something that's going to be 20 years from now saying, oh, my goodness, that's so 2010.
Yeah.
Or 2012, or 2010s.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
I don't know.
Okay, so you're saying, okay, let's look and change logo. Bill?
I don't have a strong opinion either way, but if you said, okay, I had to make a decision, I would decide to change it, go for option number 1. And because whatever my tastes are, I thought Dan's arguments were all good arguments, but maybe to me, it looks more like a city logo. And looking at the 2 on the screen, I do like option number 1 better than the old Burnsville one, even though before, when I just looked at the Burnsville one, it seemed satisfactory to me, or that I thought they did a good job, but I am more attracted to option 1, and I would
Go with one?
do that.
Okay. Dan, Okay?
In-
Because you're nodding your head.
Sure, you're okay with it?
Oh, yeah.
As long as we make the decision to do it. Well, is this the only, I guess my only question is, I'm not thrilled about the tree design in number one. The basic design of having some trees with just 2 waves of water rather than 3, fine. I mean, it does look civic. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best tree representation that they could have come up with. So where are we at as far as getting
You
other
see,
options
have you
from-
seen, because what Egan has is the oak, the big one oak tree, because that's
Yeah,
their
it's just
logo.
one, basically the outline of the tree.
It looks like a cloud,
It's a-
but
Yeah, it's kind of like just the poofy outline of it and then maybe a trunk.
And so this reflects both coniferous and deciduous, number one, and the others. So it puts
Yeah.
together the,
It's
pine
kind of hard to
trees
discern them, though. I mean, it's not as obvious as our old logo. It's very obvious. That one, it's kind of, looks like electricity or something because it's pointy and, I don't know, it didn't, I don't think it's the best option. I think they can come up with something better personally.
Okay.
I mean, graphic designers can come up with anything. They can
Madam
come up
Mayor?
with great
Yes.
things.
If there is a if we come out of this discussion with a consensus saying we like number one, but we're not in love with number one, we can absolutely take it back to our designer and have him tweak things with
Okay.
it as well. That's
Okay.
an option.
Councilmember, change the logo, and, because
I have no problem with changing the logo. I like this logo, number one, but I think it's very similar to what we already have.
Yeah,
And when I look at number 3, you see wind, I see us flowing and moving forward, and that's what we've been doing for a long time in
Yeah.
this city, and hopefully we're going to do for the next 30 years. And
Yeah.
we're not going to change this every 5 years. I mean, should we change this, it's going to be 30 or 40 years for another council sits and goes, boy, what were they thinking back then? And that's what's going, and they're going to have the same discussion we're having.
Yeah.
But so I kind of like the forward looking of what it is and where we're heading in the city right now with number 3.
yeah. That was my choice, but, I heard if we're going to change it, let's all get around some.
I think we
So
should
I
Get
heard.
excited
be
about one.
excited
Yeah.
about it.
So, would you be open if we went to one, just have Marty and the designer look at making some adaptations to it?
We
with
could
what
also
you've
do that
heard?
with number 3
I was going to
as
say
well.
1 and 3.
Yeah, 1 and
Because I'm not
3.
real excited about 1, so.
Yeah, look at 1 and 3 and see what you can come up with. But I think the blend of deciduous and coniferous is really, when you look at the trees in the wintertime, you will see a lot of pine trees in Burnsville. And we do make a point in our ordinance to make sure that there is a mix of those trees.
Madam Mayor, without getting too specific, is there any direction or ideas of, I wish this would have done this, or I wish this would have a
Well-
little more of this? Again, it's
Now,
hard,
I
it's
get-
hard to know unless you see it. That's what we told our designer too. We don't know what we like until we see it.
See, well, pull up 3, and then I'm going to go to Dan. He has a,
Sounded like number 1 was too pointy in some places.
Well, I have trouble discerning that those are trees. It looks more like, I don't know, it's because of the design. It's very pokey. It's got jagged edges. It looks more like they're getting jolted with electricity. Anyway, that was the first thing out of it. My suggestion is on 3, because I still think
3 is forward-looking.
it can be the best, and a lot of it is the swoop, instead of the traditional waves, which is very classic, civic. You know,
Yeah.
I've seen signs around the country.
Yeah.
Hundreds that have lakes in them, and they use that same symbol.
Yeah.
This has a little more river feeling, and that's okay, because we do have a river boundary on our
Right.
side, so
We're
I'm
a
right.
river
So
city.
it evokes water. And I actually
Or
like.
wind.
I like, and wind.
Or wind.
I do, and that's.
We have a lot of that too.
Part of that is just that asymmetrical swoosh, and that's so common. I mean, I've seen that a million times, the little 3 prong. I just pulled up on the web because I thought the chamber had used it, and actually their Accentuate program that multiple chambers are in uses a 3 swoosh similar to that. Anyway, so I like
I
it.
think Pepsi has the swoosh, too.
Yeah. So maybe to sort of address Mary and
Bill.
and Bill's concerns, that it might be a little too trendy, if they could take what they're doing with the pine tree and those leaves, which I like, I mean, it's a leaf from a,
Decision.
and untrend it a little bit, square it up a little bit, make it a little bit more government-looking and a little less cool private sector looking. That might,
Or
along with that
how about a
swoosh it-
little bit of both?
This is the problem with
Well,
design. It's so subjective, and it's all
Yeah.
opinion, and it's just what you see, and so
Okay.
we just got them
Are
doing
you all right with it?
Yeah, I think
Taking
that's
a
a
look
good
at 3?
suggestion.
Absolutely.
Sure.
If
Okay.
Dan actually asked me which one's more aesthetically appealing, I would say 3 is.
Yeah.
I'm just trying
Oh,
to get
yeah.
a sense of it,
It's
whether it
just-
really
yeah.
reflects
The
the
city.
city,
Right.
and so I'm totally open to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's go,
Take
so
those two
3
off the
is
back.
more forward-looking, and let's just get the coniferous and the deciduous
Yeah, a different maybe. green
somehow,
top to
how it comes
Yeah,
out. with
I
the-
like the 3 swoosh of the river,
Yeah.
the water and.
Okay,
and maybe
but
we
it
can-
sounds like the consensus is that if we find the right logo, we'd be in favor of
Yes,
I think so.
yes,
something.
okay.
Very good. I'll turn it over to Steve.
Okay, now we'll see how the monuments are going to look.
Oh, he's doing the monuments.
Yeah.
By the way, you did flip a switch and hit 13 red light, didn't you? Because I got stuck at that one.
Told you.
I was sitting there going, darn, I wonder if Steve did that to me.
Okay. And now on deck is our Public Works Director, Steve Albright, and our consultant from Kimley Horn, Thomas Harrington.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, we're here tonight to kind of wrap up a little bit of the previous discussion. And again, what was driving the previous discussion is, as part of our ends and outcomes, the city has identified that we do want to start doing some monumentation, identification at the city's boundaries. Although modest, we're not looking to spend a great deal of money. And so we've been looking at options for providing that monumentation in conjunction with some construction projects and roadway improvements and spacing that out over a number of years. And so the city has used one of our consultants, Kimley Horn, Tom Harrington's here tonight, to develop some options that everything you see tonight fits within kind of the 2-year budget that we've decided is appropriate for these items. The money has already been programmed. It won't require any increases in any budgets to facilitate what you're going to see tonight. We had planned for it, but instead of installing a monument this year, we had decided it would be better to plan, make sure we have the right design. And so Tom's going to go through that. He's also going to discuss the initial location, which would be at the east end of Highway 13, where we've got a brand-new Highway 13, almost all the way to the east, not quite yet. But that would be the first monument in conjunction with the Better Roads project, and then we would be looking to the west, kind of at the conjunction of the 13 and 5 project, to have something coming in from Savage End. And then we'd turn our attention to the 42 corridor and the 35 corridors in conjunction with other projects in those corridors. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom. He's going to take you through a brief presentation on the location and some of the monument options that we came up with that fit the city's budgetary constraints and also met MnDOT requirements for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, Madam Mayor, council members. Thank you very much. We've got a few things. We've got an agenda. We can run through it fairly quickly, but what we'd like to do is sort of take a drive-through and look at the site that has been selected along Highway 13. We'll do that first. Then we had also gone through an exercise and worked a couple of meetings with staff to look at scale and legibility of the sign. How big can it be, given MnDOT requirements, county requirements? How big does it want to be? We want to make sure that we can read the sign. We want to make sure that we can see it. And then at the end, we've got 3 concepts. So I apologize in advance because this is all about subjectivity, reference, and what you might like or not like. So we get to do this all over again, just like the logo. And then we'll talk a little bit about what the next steps might be. So existing conditions, again, we're going to take a drive-through, but we'll start with an aerial photograph. So north is up, Diffley Road is down at the bottom. Thank you, Steve. And so Highway 13, you'd be traveling south into the community. And so that circle just gives you a broad idea of where this sign would land. And there's going to be another image later on that gives you a little bit better idea of what that is. So as we travel south, this is just a series of photographs that you'll see. So we're sitting in the right-hand lane, probably the passenger seat. And we're driving along south. And as you begin to approach this opening, this first, and actually it's the largest opening, just this side of the Diffley Road sign and some of the other signs, and you can see that clearing there. There's a little tree in front, I don't know if it's ash or it's a
hackberry or some tree that we might need to take out. We might need to clear a little, but this seemed to be one of the better locations. We sort of turn our head and look at that site. It's got a lot of sumac and it's got some deciduous trees on the embankment, but it really does present a nice open space potentially for the sign location. We keep on driving only to say that the vegetation really becomes quite heavy, and so we would really have to clear if we think of other locations, maybe closer to Diffley Road, to locate that sign. We do have one smaller opening, but the right-of-way, there's a right-of-way fence up there. It gets a little close. So again, we just keep driving. We see we've got a lot of vegetation. Down at Diffley, there's an opening here, but again, as we evaluated locations, here you're starting to want to have folks look at the traffic signals and read the signs. So we want to be concerned about how close we get that to a point of decision at the intersection. So, so the location, if I could just back up, bear with me, thank you, to that one location, the opening right here. Again, we say that we've got one tree in our way, but we may not have to clear much. So it'd be located on that embankment. So then we tested scale and legibility. We went through a number of iterations of location of the signs from the edge of the roadway up the embankment. We looked at it based on distance away and reading. We looked at horizontal and vertical orientations of the sign. What we wanted to test is, again, what can you see using the photographs that we had previously? And what we determined was the horizontal sign, well, the vertical sign is interesting, and we see a lot of good examples of vertical signs in the communities. The horizontal allowed us to increase the size of Burnsville because we want to make sure that people can read that, you know, Burnsville is the name of our community. And you can see that says 24 inches for the height of the letters on the horizontal sign, whereas to get it to fit within something more vertical, I don't know if I can read it. Is that 18, 15 inches? 15 inches, so it's a bit smaller. So where we landed in the work sessions was that we would look at horizontal. And so we started to just take that very crude box with the letters on it and land it in the photographs that you'd seen previously. And what we had decided was we would want to turn that sign at an angle. So we looked at 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and then we turned it at a skew. And so here we are about 215 feet back from the sign in the car, looking at an angled horizontal sign that's 40 feet away from the shoulder. So it just, as you start to rise, there's a ditch there, and as you start to rise out of the ditch, maybe 15 feet is where the corner of that sign would be located. We just travel a little bit closer. Now we're at about 115 feet. And remember, the words Burnsville is 2 foot, and we put welcome to just to say there may be other message forms of messages on the sign that may be a little smaller, but we absolutely want to make sure that we can read Burnsville. Just as an example, right around the corner, this community has a development side, and we went and measured that, and those letters are 2 feet. It's a thin font, but it's still fairly legible from quite a ways away in the intersection, if you can recollect having seen that before. So just to give you a sense of how big 2 feet is and how big a sign is, that sign's probably 7 to 8 feet tall. It might be 25, 30 feet long in message, and then it goes beyond. So we're in the ballpark of size to this sign. So we've come up with 3 ideas that are in your packet. But first, we'll give you an idea of how we located that. So this is this closer plan view of an aerial photograph. So you can see the clearing. And so we're 40 feet back from the shoulder, the edge of the pavement there, not the travel lane, out of the ditch, up on the embankment. We turn it toward the best viewing angle as you're heading south into the community. And so that's the dark blue rectangle that you see is where the sign would be. So concept A. And we, again, with staff, we'd work through the bigger ideas, the broad ideas of should the signs be message focused? Should it just have words? Should you just read Burnsville, welcome to Burnsville, city of Burnsville, and not much else as far as the design to the sign? Or should it be, we just said, iconically based? Maybe there's a feature to it that you see that supplements the word Burnsville, or the message, "Welcome to Burnsville." And so we've got actually those two, and we found one that sort of lands in between that. The first one, though, concept A is message-focused design. It's low and horizontal. We're talking about a cast-in-place concrete wall that might be 12 inches thick. I think this, I'm having a hard time reading those numbers. Steve, you're going to have to help me. In length, 25?
40 foot?
That's 40 feet.
That's
40
foot.
feet, see, I can't read that. 40 feet in length, and we're about 6 feet high. And what we tried to show is that there's an embankment, of course, for the Highway 13 location, but in some applications, it may be, the grade may be level. So thank you very much. The grade may be level. So this is a cast-in-place concrete. We may apply some sort of a stain or coating system, not unlike what bridges have in color, some warmer color. You can see the existing logo, and those, again, the letters here, the Burnsville, those are 2 feet in height. This one happens to say City of, and I think we've varied and changed that up a little bit as one of the points of discussion as we look at all of the concepts. This sign, we believe, would also work well because it's simple, it's horizontal, with having additional background plantings behind it. I see the pointy evergreen trees, and we could even put some round deciduous trees behind that, and we could play up the logo in, using real plants. It would be the idea. So fairly simple. Again, the concrete backing is really intended to hold up the letters so that when people come in, they see "Welcome to" or "City of Burnsville," and then there's the logo. Okay, so that's concept A. Concept B gets to, again, it's message focused. They're all going to be message focused because we want to make sure that people can read Burnsville. And this one introduces a form that you might recognize, and I think of it first when I think of the arches on the bridges at 35W. But also the ice rink, the ice arena has much steeper barrel vault, but it still represents that. So what we did is we looked around and we said, are there some forms and shapes that folks might recognize, and can we play off of that to create and strengthen this iconic feature or shape or form in the monument signs that are going to be scattered throughout the community? And so that's where you see that arch shape. It's still a thin sign. It's not, but this one we're suggesting might be a box, so it's got a little bit more dimension to it. I believe that might be 1.5 feet. On the right-hand side, we see a pylon or a pier that anchors the right-hand side. So we've got some nice design play between the forms, the arch shape, and then the stack on the right-hand side. Of course, the materials we want to, in forms of being iconic, we recognize that limestone is a material that we see throughout the city, and so we'd want to continue that as a way to reinforce what you've already, what I believe people recognize in your community. So we've introduced a couple. This is a lot warmer tone. You can see that the letters are lighter, and then we've got the contrast of the dark behind with the limestone. So it's a warmer design. So that's concept B. Let's do the dimensions. So we were at about 28 feet, and the sign exposed is probably more like 15 feet on its high side. Concept C, now we went a little crazy here and we had some fun. This is truly iconic focused design, and while what you're seeing are evergreen trees, coniferous trees, and deciduous trees, it's not exactly taken from your logo. In fact, you'll notice that the existing logo does not even appear on the sign. We took the suggestion of the logo and transferred that to something that's a bit more maybe real in form, real in shape as the foreground. Again, we could plant behind it, which would be the foreground. And really what you see, if you can see the plan view, there are long, thin lines down there that would suggest different layers front to back, probably 2 or 3 layers of heavy steel. The dark brown we might think could be a Corten steel, and that's the steel in bridges and elements that you see rust out to a rusty red-brown color. And then that silver represents a stainless steel. So we could have a couple natural colors, and the idea rather than paint them green or, and any blue, we think about maintenance, we think about not having to really care for that. The base is the same as concept A and is cast in place concrete, and to get the wave of the water, we just changed the top of that concrete to create that wave. So it's a suggestion of the logo in using these materials. And so I think the first two signs said city of, no, I think the first one said city of, the other two suggest welcome to or Burnsville welcomes you. And so I think that's, in addition to talking about a direction for the sign, A, B, or C, what goes on the sign as far as the message, I think is something that we want to consider this evening also. Okay.
And I think with that, we would ask the council to give us feedback on those specific elements, noting that this is not final approval of anything. This is just giving us direction so that next year when we're ready to do this, the monument installation, we'll come back to you with a design, location, all of that for your approval at that time.
Okay, I'm going to start on this side first. Councilmember Gustafson.
Are these signs lit?
We plan on lighting the signs. We'll look at those as part of the final design options. Depending on the sign you pick, there's different potential options. One sign could be actually interior lit and have some glow to it, where others may need to have exterior lights shining on them. But the plan would be in our budget to allow us to light those entrance monuments.
Could you backlight the letters?
We could do that, especially the one I mentioned that, I think it was B, that had the box. You could put
Yeah.
lights inside and have that glow,
Yeah.
so that you could read the logo, you could read everything that shows up as white in this image, could glow.
Dan?
Well, I guess we're kind of saying which one we like. Is that what we're
Yes,
doing right now?
yes. And,
Get to give your opinion again.
Yes,
I get to give my opinion.
give your opinion. Your thoughts
The
on-
first one kind of looks like a wall. And I'm not sure I just want to have a wall
Kind
out
of
there welcoming
memorial.
people. I do like B. I like the stone that you're using in it, and it actually reflects the stone in Minnesota that's used in a lot of things. So it's not just in our bridges here, but all over the state. So that's
It's in our quarry.
It's a nice looking sign, and if this thing can be lit up, that'd be perfect. The other one, I was kind of getting the wave on that, and it was kind of fun, but I'm not sure that others would get the wave. So I like B, to make the story short.
Okay. Dan K?
No on A, too simplistic and looks very inexpensive, probably is more inexpensive. Number 3 looks like it belongs in a Colorado town. Even though, you know what, I didn't get that as waves, I got it as hills. We have a lot of hills rolling down toward the river. But it still came off very mountainous feeling. So 2 is a runaway number 1 for me. It's way by far the best. Looks fantastic.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
we do have a lot of hills.
Okay. Bill?
Yes, we do.
It's only thoughts.
I think, well, aesthetically, I like 3 the best, but I have to agree with Dan that it, whether, again, we're back to whether it reflects Burnsville. I was trying to kind of look at whether, I think 2 better fits if we go with a more utilitarian logo. I think 2 looks more utilitarian to me. It looks more like the ice arena itself.
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
sure,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I saw.
Connection.
The curve of the.
Mhm.
You know, it's to, you know, it strikes me as kind of a 70s looking design. I don't know when the, pardon? Yeah, and
Yes.
so, again, I'm sort of in between again. Is there something between 2 and 3 that's not so Colorado, but is aesthetic and not so utilitarian as it looks like? I mean, if I saw this sign in front of the ice arena, I would think it would look great, and maybe but maybe ultimately that's what we want to project. I like the words "welcomes you." That should be a must-have.
Yes.
So those are my thoughts, which seem inconsistent based on what I said previously on the logo.
It's all right. You know, it's exercising critical thinking about the future Mary.
I'll be critical. I hate number 2. Just hate it.
Oh, there's no wait a minute, there's no purple in it. How-
It really, it just is, it's very,
But which do you like? So,
one with fabulous landscaping would fine. And number 2, or number 3, I'm not sure
Can we pull up
about the
C?
metal, but it has possibilities for me. I like that, I like the undulation of the
Rolling slopes.
that, yeah. And what I was thinking is, maybe some real trees rather than the metal trees. Real trees. I mean, to me, that's more aesthetically pleasing. But 2 is just, it's just sort of,
One thing I would add to the
Very,
council,
very-
if we are trying to keep these, what I'm going to call them, I'm going to be Public Works Director,
yeah.
dislikes all planted things, but the locations and places we're going to plant these are not going to be places that we're going to
That's
want to be
right.
spending a lot of time maintenance-wise, and
No,
irrigation will
and
not
when
be
I-
available probably,
yeah,
so.
when I'm
if-
saying
yeah.
landscaping, I'm meaning like evergreens, things that are not going to be.
And we
required.
still, even with evergreens, would probably want to irrigate them, just
Yeah.
that,
So
it
those are
seems
all
to be
of
a
the-
trend we're at, so.
Yeah.
yeah.
If possible, I'm going to discourage maintenance on
Makes
them,
sense.
Yeah.
and just for that reason, I
Yeah.
think we want to keep our costs down on long-term maintenance and have something. We're still going to have to mow them and keep the area
Sure.
upkept, but just
But a
just
good
food
point.
for thought. So
Good point.
I like the fact you like the modern design, though.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, yeah. When I first looked at all of this too, I like the curves of C. What comes out for me with B was when I looked at B, our bridge on the Parkway.
Yes.
I was reminded of the bridge on the Parkway, and of
I didn't
course
see that at all.
with the limestone that spoke to me because Burnsville has a quarry, a limestone quarry. So I saw those as elements of Burnsville, and so that was there. But if there's a way, because I don't know how readable C is, because it's so low. It's even lower, it appears, than A. Is it 4 feet on one side?
it's about 9 feet on the high side.
the high
Yeah,
side,
and
so it's
remembering
9?
it's built into a hillside slightly, so you're
So
going to have that
it's
effect almost.
just,
Yeah.
so that's what, so from the here, and so it'll hit the high side of the hill on the low side of the sign. Is there a way of marrying some of the elements of B and C? No?
The
Because they're
limestone-
too.
Oh, they're
The
so-
limestone part you could probably
Yeah,
base.
yeah.
That's about.
Yeah, because the other was cast, Concrete.
The designs are quite different. I don't
They're
know if you
very
would call
different.
that civic or institutional or whatever you might, traditional might be the word
Yeah, I
for
think
B.
it's classic, traditional.
it's
Right.
very classic, traditional, and the elements that I liked about it was that it reflected the bridge. And that's what I saw when
I didn't see
And-
bridge, I didn't see ice center, I just saw dated. Dated.
okay. But C was, what do you all think?
You know my opinion. I
You like
I thought
B.
it is classic, but
Yeah.
I thought it was very quality looking. And it's probably the combination of the limestone
limestone.
and the
That's
the
what I saw, the
materials. You could-
limestone and
you
the
have-
bridge.
You have the dome, or the arch roof, the backdrop to the Burnsville, and the limestone, and then even a ledge, it looks like, the cap on the limestone, so you have an opportunity to put multiple materials in, and
Yeah.
that's what our building code requires, when buildings are built, to have multiple different natural rock, brick, stucco, whatever, and this gives you the opportunity to do that, which I think can even improve the look.
Yeah, and when I was thinking about this, I was also thinking of what happens when it is put out on 35W. Then it has, on the north side, B would reflect and come down 35, and you'll meet the bridge, and you'll have that concrete precast.
One
that
thing
reflects.
B, sorry, Mayor, one thing B allows us to do is it does allow us on different roadways to potentially scale it. We have, Highway 13 has some requirements for size. 35 most likely will be off the right-of-way, so we'll have some other things to deal with. But 42, I'm not sure we want such a massive monument on 42. It might allow us to downsize the monument slightly
You mean
in
like
scale.
like C?
Yeah, very possible, so.
Yeah, and so for me, when I was thinking of 35W, because I know where, the background told us where this would start, but I was thinking 35W, and then the continuity from the bridge, and then onto the, so it might look dated. I was looking at, I was just looking at continuity and how that would be on 35W as well as 13 and 42.
I would say it grows, I mean, it grows on me. I'm not against it, because I don't profess to be an expert. And those are all good arguments, so I'm not against it.
I'm not against it, but I could go with Mary if the logo changed to the modern logo to go with the rest of it. It would look really good.
Oh, 3?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Well, I think what our Public Works Director is also saying that 3 is going to be harder in some areas of the city where,
3 works nicely, I think, on a hillside.
Yeah.
That's what we
but
have.
it's not going to,
But this
We have a
is,
few hills in town.
yeah.
yeah, but not
There's probably one or
everywhere.
two options like this, I think, on 42. The other end of 13, you're going
Yeah.
to be looking at very flat areas.
Yeah.
And so you're going to want something that kind of stands on its own. It's not part of the hillside, I guess, is what
Yeah,
I'd say.
and that's what I was thinking about when you're looking at that. Bill?
So based on that argument, to me, that's a factual argument that suggests that that's the way it should be because of what you stated, Steve, so.
Yeah. B is much better.
I still say, and no offense, I think B is dated and dowdy.
Don't. Gentlemen, B,
Oh, I can go with
B.
B.
B?
No,
Okay, well, B is good.
just,
B reflects.
I want a little line under there, Mary Sherry voted against this.
It'll be in very fine print.
Can you backlight that too?
Very fine print.
We'll try to work that in.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, we're moving right along. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tom and Steve, thank you very, very, very much. Okay. And now, the next item, Steve, is also yours.
I'm going to
This is the
share
Minnesota
this one, though.
River Quadrant. And you will share this with Jenny, and presenting on the update for the Minnesota River Quadrant Soil Remediation Project is Steve Albrecht, our Public Works Director, Jenny Faulkner, our Community Development Director, and Skip Nienhaus, our Economic Development Coordinator.
Madam Mayor, council members, we're back before you tonight to discuss the Minnesota River Quadrant. And we've got this kind of some of the key players in our team, but also the city manager and the CFO, Heather Johnston, have been part of this team along with several other staff members. But what we want to do tonight is bring the council up to speed on where we're at with some of the initiatives in the MRQ. And so really touch on a couple of things. And so first, we're going to talk about the current situation, kind of the state of the MRQ real quickly for everyone. For those who haven't been following along, bring them up to speed. And then we'd like to delve into the findings a little bit and why we're here tonight. And there's 3 things really that we have more information on tonight that I think are valuable for the council to consider and will help us move forward. The first of which is we've completed our preliminary soil study out there where we did borings with property owners that were interested. And so we've got those results. We also are at a point with the 13 and 5 project that we have good firm information on what dirt might be available as part of that project to be used in the MRQ area. And the other thing that we've done is Skip Nienhaus and myself have met with all the property owners that were interested in the Lady Bird Lane as part of the project. And so we've gotten quite a bit of good feedback and dialogue from them on what the challenges might be, what their interests might be, and just some good information for the city to consider as we move forward with the MRQ. And so we'll share that tonight. And so also, we want to get some guidance. We're kind of at a point where we need to decide what are our goals and what is the council's goals for the MRQ so that we can come back to you with a plan that will implement those goals based on the information we received, and we can start moving forward. With the 13 and 5 project coming, the opportunities to potentially utilize some of that dirt, we need to move forward on that. And so that's part of it too. And so Jenny will be touching on those goals and talking about land uses and some other things too, because this goes way beyond just the soil project, the discussion. And then finally, the next steps is obviously that direction from the council. So moving forward, just to refresh the audience's memory, is that our council's ends and outcomes, the MRQ, Minnesota River Quadrant, is one of the vital pieces of our development and redevelopment section of our ends and outcomes. Many of the items are woven into the MRQ. It's kind of our last frontier, if you will, in that area. And so it's important to know, why are we even talking about the MRQ? We believe it has vital development potential, and it's an area that's underutilized at this point. And for the purposes of tonight's conversation, we're not talking about the entire MRQ per se. We're talking about one of the areas of the MRQ, which we call kind of the Lady Bird Lane area. And the reason we're talking about that area is it's a special area in that it has some soil issues that aren't inherent necessarily to the entire MRQ. But it also abuts 35 and 13, where we have a substantial amount of frontage and it's part of that corridor, and so there's value with that, and so we want to try to enhance and enable any development in that area because we see that as a benefit to the community and the tax base. So talking about our current situation, I think what we all are aware of is that with the economy slowing down, both our landfill and our quarry operations have slowed down in certain ways, and so that has extended out the lives of both of those facilities. And so we have some changing timelines on just when the entire MRQ will probably develop. So that's something that we're certainly considering at this time. We also know that at this point, the market itself, left without any assistance, whether it be land use modifications or some kind of financial programs, does not seem interested, at least at this time, in developing additional uses in that Lady Bird Lane area. So something we need to be realistic about. Also, we have a couple of other things. Funding-wise, the city, from our pooled TIF, had dedicated about $250,000 to help facilitate soil corrections in that area and development. And so we have utilized a little of that for the study that was completed, but the majority of that money still remains to be utilized for the soil initiatives. It is restricted in its uses as that money's from our pooled TIF, but it was dedicated for those purposes. Another thing, Skip has obtained for the city a $250,000 grant that can be used for both soil remediation easements and then also ponding in that area. So we have a variety of things that we can use that $250,000 for in that area. And one of the good things is we do have to match that money, but we have money allocated for our Yellow Freight Pond project that will fulfill our match for that. So we have another $250,000 that's eligible to help us with these initiatives. Findings. We want to just kind of update you on the findings. As I mentioned, our preliminary soils reports have been completed, and we've shared those results with the property owners. And to nobody's surprise, there's a lot of bad soils in this area, to the tune of about 800,000 cubic yards of bad soils. And in many cases, we have 20-plus feet of bad soils going down to the limestone.
Could you explain for the people who are listening or watching what you mean by bad soils? It's not contaminated.
Certainly, these are not contaminated soils.
Yeah.
This area of town has what we call organic soils, or soils that can't support buildings, structures without being excavated or special things being done to the properties. And that's why we don't have buildings on those areas for the most part, because they can't support it. We do have a few buildings, and in those cases, what they've done is they've actually, just the footprint of the building has been excavated down for the most part. In many areas, we have 20-plus feet of what we call these organic soils going down to the actual bedrock itself. And so,
And it's like.
And that's a natural occurrence.
yes, it's a natural
isn't that
occurrence.
correct?
You're in a river bottom area. It's not
Thank you.
uncommon to have that material at some time in the past was
Right.
laid there by the
Yeah,
river.
I just
itself.
want to be sure
Nope.
people understand that when you say bad soils, I mean, we all know what
Yes,
you're
we're-
talking
we're not
about.
It's not
contaminated.
contaminated,
That's
and it's
correct.
not tires that have
Yeah.
been
Thank you.
from way back in the,
Not in this area.
no, not in, we had some other areas where we had,
Unbuildable soil.
Yeah,
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, like peat.
Yes, and so a couple of the other issues is with that, if we were to have to excavate out without the benefit of, say, excess fill from one of our other projects, like the 13 and 5 project, we could be looking at up to $12.7 million to remove the soils and completely correct that area. Well, when you look at the current Dakota County taxable values on those properties, we're talking $4.5 million worth of property. So from that standpoint, that doesn't make a lot of sense to spend that kind of dollars alone. And so you can see why the property owners themselves would have trouble funding something like that for total soil correction. And so as its own little area, it's difficult for that Lady Bird Lane area. It needs to be, for total soil corrections, almost to be part of a bigger project for those corrections to be absorbed. 13 and 5 project we mentioned. That project is moving forward. We know that we're going to have at least 300,000 yards of excess material from that project, meaning dirt that they have to remove from that project and haul off. We have done exploratory borings on that with the state of Minnesota, and we believe a good portion of that 300,000 yards will be suitable for structural use or reuse in this area. And the reason we're talking about 13 and 5 for the public's sense is we're immediately adjacent to these sites. And so if there's an opportunity
Save
for us
money.
to provide a site or location to dispose of that soils, it's twofold. It may help the economic development initiatives in this area, number one. Number two, it may help keep the costs down on the 13 and 5 project if that
Yes.
soil doesn't have to be hauled into trucks and hauled away. So something the city and the county are interested in. Now, it's a little difficult in that we can't, because of the federal dollars and the way that the funding for this project is set up, we can't just say, you should put this soil here, this is where the soil is going to go. What we can do is provide sites, though, to the bidders and work through the project that way, and the county and state are willing to work with us on that. So there's no guarantee necessarily that we would get the 300,000 yards, but what it does is it sets the bar for a good low-cost option, and to be honest, if we find a cheaper option, that benefits the taxpayers of the city and the county also, because that means they've actually saved the project more money. So we're not completely a loser if we weren't able to get the soil in this area. And now I'm going to turn it over to Skip to just talk a little bit about those owner meetings that we had and what the sense we got from them.
Okay.
As Mr. Albrecht said, we've had multiple meetings and quite a few phone calls with the primary owners in the Lady Bird Lane area. We shared with them the findings of the study, and then we also asked them to give us feedback. What are they thinking about? What are they thinking they might want to do? Where are they at? And I'd just like to share with you some of the answers we got. The Dworsky family, which is basically the Park Jeep property, they are actually very interested in working with the city on a remediation project and some type of redevelopment of their property. At this point in time, they don't know what that redevelopment might be, but there's a very, very strong interest in working with us. Could be a very good project to utilize some of the 5 and 13 dirt to go with that. The Assaford properties are very unique. Their prime driver right now is finding a way to pay their taxes on their land. And they have a lot of vacant land that they pay taxes on that they can't find any interim uses to put on that land. So that's their driving factor for them. They are asking that council take a look at possibly some additional and extended interim uses that would be allowable for a 15 to a 20-year period of time that would allow them to utilize some of their land and then go into full redevelopment as the whole MRQ begins to develop. The Rebecco parcels, they are also interested in having an extended interim use, but they actually want to be part of that extended interim use and be part of the remediation process on the other parcels. They could actually excavate the dirt off of the other parcels and in conjunction with others, remix that dirt and sell it and reuse it. So if they're allowed to stay in the area for a longer period of time, they could actually be an integral part of our solution to our problem. And then we have 2 parcels left on the east end of the property that are owned by the Nolans. The Nolans actually have absolutely no desire to redevelop that property. Quite frankly, they told us that their owners forget about the property except once a year when they get the $25,000 tax bill. And then they ask, why are we paying this? Because we're not going to do anything with this. We explained to them that we might be able to help them out a little bit, that we would actually possibly want to have some easements to store some dirt on. And their response to us was, how would you like to buy the properties from us and you can use them? So they could go either way, but those 2 parcels really, there's no redevelopment that's going to occur on those two parcels anytime in the foreseeable future because the owners just don't have any wherewithal to do it. The few times they have been approached to sell their land, they've been approached to sell one of the parcels. They are not interested in selling only one parcel. They have always told everyone that has approached them, will only sell both parcels. And unfortunately, the parcels actually straddle the street, so there's one on each side, so it makes it a lot harder. Lot of different reactions from what we got. I will say that the property owners down there were very receptive to our meetings. I think they were actually pleased that something was maybe going to happen. They all had a little different version of what they'd like to see happen, but I think you can see that they somewhat were honing in on let's do something over the next 15 or 20 years and let's move the process along. And I'll now turn it over to Ms. Faulkner, who will give you some ideas of what those possible goals could be over the next 15 or 20 years.
Okay.
Thanks, Skip. Madam Mayor, members of the council, in my old fashion here, I've laid a continuum of options out, as we've talked about over the last several months on this project. The top one is the least city involvement, the least city cost, and that is to do nothing. Let the market continue to drive what's going out there as it has for the last 40, 50 years. However, the redevelopment timeframe on that, as we see it, given the magnitude of the soils issues and the feedback from the property owners, is that we're talking redevelopment timeframe about 20 to 30 years, just in the Lady Bird Lane area. We have, of course, the quarry and the landfill that are out on similar timelines as well. Then if there were to be some city involvement, that would provide for some flexibility on interim uses, as we've talked to some of the property owners that they would like to see. Interim uses that would allow a time period of 15 to 20 years until the market could support a higher and better use of those properties. That could bring us redevelopment perhaps in 10 to 15 years. Then option 3 is if the city were to be proactive in helping remediate the soils using the MnDOT dirt, along with interim uses that would allow those property owners to capture that opportunity in the meantime. We see a redevelopment timeframe of 5 to 10 years. That's the time it would take to fix some of the soils, which would allow for some future higher and better use out there. And then the most intensive one, most city dollars, but quickest turnaround time for redevelopment would be facilitating full soil remediation, the city bearing the cost of that $12 million or so to fix the soil. So there's a whole gamut of options to do nothing, do something, do a little more, and do everything. The pros and cons are that the first one, as I said, would take the longest. Property remains underutilized, least expensive, longest redevelopment. The second one would involve city involvement, just changing the land use and the zoning requirements would perhaps allow for better utilized properties at the moment, create some kind of tax base, create some kind of jobs. We're not quite sure what that would be because we're talking uses that would be outdoor storage, perhaps parking lots, uses that don't have a lot of soils to correct because they wouldn't be able to support that cost. And then the one that involves a little bit more would be the city involvement, 5 to 10 years. That would allow redevelopment to begin on the fringes of the area, and I'll put up a map here in a second. Expanded interim uses that help facilitate, kind of make the best case scenario by allowing different interim uses now that would make the timeline go a little bit quicker while we're fixing up the soils to allow better use to go on there as quick as possible. So those interim uses could be replaced by higher values in approximately 20 years. And then city involvement on this would be to facilitate the soils correction and then some ordinance changes in the near future. And the interim soil remediation area involves a yellow area here. These are the property owners that Steve and Skip had talked to that have expressed some interest in fixing up their soils to some extent or another with some assistance from us. And then again, the last option where the city would do an all-out soil remediation project there, we'd bear the brunt of that cost until we could recapture that at some point in the future, which would be questionable. The value of those future uses would be questionable in this economy if we were to do that, but it is an option that we did want to let you know you have. With that, we're seeking direction from you on what your goals are for this area. How intensive an involvement do you want to be engaged in the redevelopment of the MRQ area?
Dan Gustafson?
Well, I know the MRQ has been a project for the city for a long time, and I've been looking at the maps in Craig's office since I've been in office, and You've been looking at them longer than I have, and there's some really great vision down in that area. But because of the economy and some of the decisions being made by the Met Council and others according to our landfill, we have two companies down there that are going to be there far longer than we anticipated. So we have a lot of landowners that are kind of held hostage by circumstance right now. And I think it would be good for us, because we're going to have to remediate these soils at one point anyways. And so I would look at option number 3 more as what we can do along the way as we're waiting for the rest of the MRQ to be ready to develop, we should do. And if we can get some development down in here, in this area, help these landowners and get some of the burdens off of some of them. I mean, it's nice the Nolans send us $25,000 every year, but it's got to be tough on them, and maybe we can look at their land. I know the Asselfords would certainly like to see some things happen in that area. So I think a loosening of interim uses that area for the next 10, 15, 20 years, whatever is decided, might be the prudent approach for us to take to get something going down there while we're waiting for the MRQ to become ready for the vision that was created 10, 15 years ago. So that's pretty much where I'm at on that one.
Okay, Mary?
Well, I just have a question regarding number 3, and that is, what do you mean by proactively assist? What is the cost associated with that?
Well, in the situation of 3, what we have is right now we have 2 users who actually dirt work is what they do. And so we believe, and we've talked to them, they are interested in potentially mining the black dirt and then mixing it with their dirt and selling it, so thereby correcting it as part of their operations. The assistance that we would provide is using the easement money and some of the money we have. Maybe we approach the Nolan property, either about purchasing easements or what have you, to give them, they need a staging area. That's one of the problems, is you need to be able to excavate and stage. And so that's where the city's assistance might come in, utilizing the funds we have already available in that area. The other part of 3 is we still could proceed with the Dworsky project on the west end, because that they're ready to go, and we may potentially have some dirt. So it kind of allows you to do a couple different approaches in different areas, but it would allow us over time, even though it's not a mass correction of the soils, it allows the property to be utilized, and it also allows for us to correct the problem over a period of time and make some positive steps with the interim use extensions versus just extending interim uses and still not dealing with the animal that is the bad soils in that area.
So you're not really saying this would be, this is a cost that's already budgeted, so to speak? I mean, or it's in the budget to do
The
it?
city's cost participation in that option would be really helping potentially acquire some easements and help tie up
Got
some
it.
land for staging.
Okay.
And then also
Well-
facilitating the MnDOT soils on the Dworsky property and how we work with them.
Well, in addition to what Dan just said, I think that option 3 would probably be our best opportunity to increase the tax base down there, you know, to increase the value of the properties. I think we have to be realistic about how long it's going to be before we get to this project. And it's crazy to just not do what we can.
Okay. Jenny, and then I'll go to Bill.
I just wanted to add to the land uses on option 3, if we are going to start to fix the soils, as Steve was talking about, that means there'll be dirt out there and there'll be an opportunity for property owners to fix the dirt. So we're talking about timelines that are different than we had in the past, just so you're aware of that.
And I think that's a given. We all know that the timelines are all going to change because of the economy and also because of the quarry as well as the landfill. Did you have a comment to make before I go to Bill? Okay, Craig?
Perhaps just to expand a little bit on what Ms. Faulkner said, we would maybe differentiate the interim use there as mining, because as Mr. Albrecht said, they would actually remove some of the soil, mix it for purposes of resale, and then replace with good foundation material, as opposed to some of the uses that we presently have going on there, which is the importation
That's right.
of non-foundation soil for purposes of resale. That's, the downside of that is there is no end.
Yes.
I mean, that use could go on forever.
Yes.
That's a real contrast to the mining interim use permit, which, you know, that has a sort of maybe an unsavory sound to it when we're mining in our area, but I think it's a realistic assessment of what we need to do to bring ourselves to a developable condition.
Yeah, that's good clarification, because I know that when you and I talked about this, it is about the mining and not bringing in more soils, because that's not the intent of this. And where we would need to go with looking at what interim uses are going to be, and then really defining that everybody know that there is an end
Correct.
to the use. Okay, Bill?
So Steve, I'm just going to follow up on something Mary was asking again. So I always say as a lawyer, I'm bad at math, so I just want to try to understand this. So what I heard you say, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, is that our only real cost would be whatever the cost would be to get easements on maybe the Nolan property as a staging area. Otherwise, the city ultimately could have no cost if everything worked in that scenario. Is that accurate?
Let me kind of rephrase that a little bit. There's different degrees within that option that that could be one, the council could actually do that option and what the city's only involvement is actually changing some regulations to allow for that to happen, which would be a zero cost option.
Yeah.
We could proactively try to encourage it and utilize our easement money to help facilitate the process.
That's right.
The other piece of that too that we need to look at is the refilling with good soils. And so the extent that we're involved in that, we may look at this as an opportunity with various city projects to take good soils that are excavated from those projects, and as part of those projects, deposit them in this location and compact those areas. So there could be a range, there's still a range of costs potentially that the council would consider through that, so.
So as a follow-up to that, my understanding is we have right now approximately $450,000. And my understanding then, for example, on a project that you just described where the city was taking out good dirt, would that just be in the ordinary course of a project and that they'd have to do with something with that dirt anyway?
It depends on how we bid the project. We can certainly do it that way and then just place the dirt here. It really depends on what dirt we have available. But again, those are calculated decisions that we would make as a city before we got into any costs.
So if you were going to give your best guess on 3, what the range would be, just best guess within your just best guess, what would yours, and there could be a 0, but I mean, what is your best guess of range of cost to the city just?
I think it's more than the $450,000, but it's associated with other projects, I would say, because I think you'd place and dispose of that soil. And we haven't really talked about, it depends on how quickly it's done, too. We may, depending on what the council's comfortable with, we have to determine how long are we going to allow them to have an open area.
Yeah.
And we also, one of the unknowns that we've talked about is how quickly will the dirt be excavated and removed? And we could certainly make it a condition of their interim use that, say, the city will find the soil and have it deposited there, but they're responsible for backfilling the soil and compacting it in that location. Those are the types of things that make it hard to put a dollar amount on, but like I said, we can put the burden on working with the property owners. We're going to help you facilitate it, but you're going to have to actually do the work. And in this case, we have 2 grading contractors that are at least interested in discussing with us further about them as the course of their regular business doing that. Part of what we've seen from the Rebecca property is they know ultimately they're going to be leaving this property. So to them, there's benefit to excavating the dirt, selling it, and replacing it and compacting it properly, because then when they're done, they have a parcel that's sellable. I think working with the Asselfords, we would take the same approach in the same manner. And so part of, there will be some city commitment. The council will determine depending on where we go with this, what is the limit of what the city wants. I think the 450 is probably kind of if we want to make something happen, we're going to commit the 450. Beyond that, that's really up to the council to decide, other than us maybe providing dirt from some projects that it's deposited there. Because hauling it there is incidental to our other projects. It's when you have to haul it and compact it, that's where some additional costs if we're going to pay for that compaction. So I don't know that we're prepared to answer that question. So I would note that those are good questions for us when we come back to you with a plan. What are our potential cost implications if that scenario were to play out?
Okay.
And say theoretically this went forward at 3, because I'm of the mind in my mind, it's either 2 or 3. And so the question becomes have you assessed again, within your best guess, what the benefit to the city would be within a range, which I know is kind of hard to do, but it's a difference of what, 10 to 15, 5 to 10 years versus 10 to 15-year development. What is the payback? What is the potential tax-based payback? Or
Yeah.
have you looked at that?
Skip?
Councilmember Coughlin, I think possibly a different way to look at that is, first of all, if you utilize option number 3, there's 2 current business owners located in MRQ that will stay there and do the mining for us, so we retain 2 businesses. Secondly, some of the interim uses, while we can't calculate the tax value of them because we don't yet know what they are, we believe that they will be the type of uses that will bring in at least good paying jobs. So we're going to increase our employee count in that area. Before we actually know the businesses and the uses and everything else, it's hard to calculate from a tax benefit what those are. But certainly there would be some slow increase in the taxes.
Anything else? Or,
I'd ask, once in a while I do this, just, Craig, I'd like your thoughts on this, based on your experience, as well as just for the citizens, as a city manager and an engineer as well.
Well, we've wrestled with all of the things that you're wrestling with as we struggled with how to bring this to you. But I think staff's perspective is that, number one, it's going to be pretty unpalatable. I think council is really doing some good thinking in saying that we ought to be looking at 2 and 3. And I think the arrival that we had with the soils data, I have to admit, was discouraging to us. It's not that not that we didn't know that there was bad foundation soils there. We certainly did. I think the extent of it discouraged us. And it became very clear to us that we couldn't be all things to all people there. And as we worked our way through to it, then again, we concluded that interim uses, revised interim uses, need to be on the table. So we think that certainly, the ends of the continuum that Ms. Faulkner has put together are kind of unacceptable on either way. You need to be in the middle, I think. And by the way, we didn't contrive them to be that way, but the dollars are so big on the other end of the continuum as to be kind of not feasible for us.
price
And the do-nothing option on the far end of the other spectrum just does not work for us either. I think that that number 3 has a good potential of having a very limited exposure for the city. And as Mr. Albrecht says, that would be a case-by-case basis that the council would evaluate as we go forward. If we start out with the money that the council has already tentatively earmarked, that gets us a ways down the road, and maybe we can build some momentum. Then, as Mr. Albrecht is able to maybe bring together some other options, you can consider them one by one. But number 3 may allow us to really build a little bit of momentum with some resources that we know we have.
okay. Are you okay now? All right. Dan Kay?
3 is the only logical option, I think, for us. And, we have a lot more work to do on this. I know this is at the front end of this situation, and I think more conversations with the landowners will take place. And so, from a direction standpoint to staff, 3 is it.
Okay, very good. I also thought 3 was the most prudent way for us to proceed. It is moving forward and building and expanding our tax base, but also being very, very conservative in our approach. But I have a question. Craig, do you remember on our TIF, can we start the TIF even with interim use or not? With just the soils part, because I know we had 3 provisions on that legislation. We could do soils correction, and we could pool, and we could go project by project.
We could. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility in that TIF legislation. and soils correction was specifically envisioned in there.
Yeah.
We always worry about starting the clock, as
I
we
know.
say, on the TIF districts.
But we're only, but we got the provision that we can do it project by project.
We
so
can.
So we won't have to spend it all on it.
We can. I think the other discouraging thing that we found, and Mr. Nienhaus alluded to it, is, what we can maybe hope to realize in increment there is also going to be insufficient to deal with the soils problem. That has always been sort of, the underlying thought is perhaps we'd be able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps here using TIF to assist the landowners and so on, but the problem is just too big for that.
Okay. Jenny, and then I'll come to you, Mary. I want to hear.
Madam Mayor, as we move forward with an implementation for
Yeah.
this option, it may be to our advantage from a technicality standpoint to establish a TIF district before we fix the soils, even though
Yeah.
we're not doing a
Yeah.
development contract with a developer. So
Yeah.
as we pull together the implementation plan and what has to happen when and what options the city has, we'll bring that forward to you. So even though there may not be much increment, there may be something,
But
we don't want to
it's-
miss the
That's
missed
right.
opportunity by not creating that
Yeah.
now, so.
And see, that's where I was going with this, because what I want to make sure is that we don't lose the opportunity of capturing the growth value by fixing the soils. Just
And it-
by fixing the soils, we will capture the value.
And it's not only the
The
value, it's
increased
the
value.
activity of fixing the
Yeah.
soils. Once the soils are fixed, we can't go back and create
That's
that
right.
TIF district. So we may almost be forced to do it now, even though we
That's
know
the
there's
re-
no value, just because of that.
Yeah, and that's my question. But the thing is, we'll start building the value and the capacity, and we don't miss that opportunity. Mary, you had a
I
question.
just have a thank you that I want to express to staff. The reason we're even talking about this in this way is that our staff came up with what I believe is a positively elegant solution to dealing with the excess dirt at 35 and, or 13 and 5, and the need for soils correction down here. It really was brilliant, and it's one of those things that civil engineers do that they don't get credit for, and I want to give you credit for that. And Steve is pointing to Craig, and Craig's got his head down, and I know it was his
Only if
idea.
it works.
It will work, and I think it's a wonderful thing. And the other thank you is owed to the community development and economic development staff. Skip, I was really excited to hear you talk about how excited the businesses were down there. I mean, those businesses are just really out of sight, out of mind. I think a lot of people are even surprised to know they're there. They've been operating there for decades, and they're low-value businesses in terms of tax return. And
We had trouble finding a couple.
I believe it. But the fact that you that you got that kind of response, it was absolutely terrific. Thank you.
So back to, okay, so we'll make sure. So when you come back, you will have, we'll look at interim uses. What would that be like? Establishing the TIF district so that we don't miss those opportunities. And then make sure that Steve, you're going to be working with MnDOT because they're the ones who are going to be letting the project.
We'll be moving forward on a plan for the council to have at least acquired easement areas for disposal of that property.
Yeah.
At the same time, we'll be talking to the Dworsky property
Yes.
about their potential redevelopment and trying to give ourselves multiple options to hopefully fulfill our goals down there so that we have kind of backup and contingency plans depending on what's happening.
And so, and with the county and the state, but the state is letting the project. And so will we be having a provision about our ability to use that soil and not
County,
get it?
I'll make one correction. The county's actually the lead on the project,
The
and they're
county
letting
is
the
the lead on
project,
the
yes.
project.
And as I said, there are restrictions as to what they can put in the documents, but they can provide, and they can assist us with providing the information of the disposal site and all of that to the
Okay.
contractors and work with us so that we can contact the contractors and sell them
Mm-hmm.
on this location and try to facilitate some easy ways for them to not have to load dirt, haul it away, long distance, be able to load it maybe on off-road trucks, take it to where we want to go and dispose of it.
Yeah.
The Dworsky site is in play. The Dworsky site is immediately adjacent to the project.
And
potentially
they're
down below there,
wonderful.
so.
The brothers are just fabulous. both Jonathan and David. So I know that they've worked very well with you, and my conversation with them also is that they're willing to work with us on all of this. But, okay, so those are some of the things. So we're going to, what I'm hearing from the council, option 3 is the most prudent way to move. Now, what our citizens ought to know is that this is the beginning of our process of going forth. We're giving staff direction to move in this direction, utilizing concept 3, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And so for our citizens to recognize that there's still a lot of work that we're going to be doing with this, but at least we're saying there is an opportunity here for us to improve the tax base. So to all of our staff members, thank you very much for all of your hard work. And is there anything else with regard to direction that you need? Skip?
Madam Mayor, one other piece of direction regarding the Nolan properties.
Yes.
If they are, staff has asked them to give some consideration as to what they would sell the land for.
Yes.
If they come back with that direction or with that price, and it's somewhere around what an easement would cost us, is council giving us direction to continue those discussions along the possibility of purchasing that land?
Well, I think that's what you're hearing in 3, is to explore those opportunities. And for the Nolans, if they're listening, it doesn't mean that that's where we're going. We just want to understand what the cost is going to be and whether we have the funds in place to acquire that.
And staff will evaluate all the best options for easement and
Yes.
to facilitate the projects, and we'll be prepared to tell the council. We've had appraisals done in the Yellow Freight property, so we know what the cost of land should
Yeah.
be down there, and so we can provide very good information for the council.
Yeah.
So you can make very educated decisions in
Yeah.
the future on it.
And there's a very good, and for our citizens to also understand, there's very, very good process in place where land is appraised and easements costs are in place. So it's not that we're going to be throwing away money. But it's not a done deal. It's direction to staff to explore those opportunities. So, staff, thank you very much. Well done. The next item is the budget open house brainstorm, and this one is our city manager, Craig Ebling, and Heather, and I think this is,
Heather and Marty.
Madam Mayor, I'll start this off. I think kicking off the brainstorming ideas for budget open house alternatives. At the all-day work session in January, we had some discussion about the lack of attendance that we've had the last couple of years at the budget open house. What we've done there is we've had a physical open house where we have anywhere between 16 to 20 staff, senior staff in most cases, standing at easels with information about the budget and available for the public to come and ask questions. We have had, really, in terms of people who probably came for the open house that did not have other commitments at City Hall, probably 2 at each of those. Other folks did attend, and we were very grateful for them attending, but they did have other business at City Hall as well. And so when we talk about the time invested in this, and really what we understand the purpose of this is to really reach out and engage residents. This isn't proving to be the most effective way of doing that. And so Mr. Dahl is going to go through some ideas. What we talked about really is doing a virtual open house. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dahl, and he can talk about how we would prefer to offer you a more effective way of engaging the residents. So.
thank you.
Thank you.
Marty?
Madam Mayor, members of the council. When we say virtual open house, what we're really talking about here, at least as option 1A, in my opinion, is doing a video based primarily on the department budget presentations. Not necessarily taking those PowerPoint presentations and turning them into a video, but using that information to create a video that shows what the different departments are doing, how their budgets are spent, and then providing an opportunity for feedback similar to what would possibly go on at the open house, where they can talk face-to-face to department heads, but instead give them the contact information for these department heads, phone and email, and provide them a way. Currently, on our website, we do have a form that can be filled out with questions about the budget that's underutilized. Provide them a direct link to that form on that video so they can either provide their comments in general get in contact with the staff person that they need to talk to. One of the reasons we look at doing or consider looking at doing a video, as Heather mentioned, we're at about 2 people per meeting. The videos that we've put on our YouTube channel in the last year are getting anywhere between 100 and 400 plus views
Better than 2.
typically, which it's not a lot when you talk about 60,000 people, but it's a wider audience than what we're getting that's
Yeah.
coming to City Hall. And that's not counting anyone who's watching it on our cable channels, because unfortunately we don't have any sort of rating system for that. So what we did was we just put together a brief sample. Bear in mind that what you'll be watching here is what we like to call in the business the rough cut. So that it's a little rough around the edges, but I think it's a good example of what we would be proposing doing in replacement of an open house. And we what we did was did a short introduction, and then I used the communications department as an example. And I'll go ahead and just play that for you.
From police and fire protection, to the streets you drive on, to the hundreds of acres of parks and open spaces you enjoy, the City of Burnsville provides an abundance of services and amenities to keep Burnsville a great place to live, work, and raise a family. Just like most households, the city must make decisions on how to manage its spending on these many services. Each year, the city develops an annual budget to prioritize spending, placing the highest priority on the most important services. Since about 1/3 of the city's budget comes from property taxes, the City Council works hard to limit the tax burden that falls to residents and businesses. This video will highlight the major services provided by the city and invite you to participate in the development of the city's 2013 budget by helping prioritize the growing needs of our community. The Communications Department strives to keep the city's residents, businesses, and visitors informed of what's going on at City Hall. This is done using a variety of print, digital, and video tools, including the city's quarterly newsletter, the Burnsville Bulletin, the city's website, burnsville.org, email and social media alerts, coordination with members of print and television media, and a number of other print and digital communications developed for specific departments and services. The Communications Department is unique in that it is not funded from the city's general fund. Instead, fees paid for the city's cable franchise funds the work of this department. Speaking of cable, a portion of those cable franchise fees are also dedicated to the city's cable television operation, Burnsville Community Television. BCTV programs 2 cable television channels, as well as an online YouTube channel to provide video of public meetings, community events, and educational videos related to city services. BCTV also operates a professional television studio at Burnsville High School that allows both students and members of the public to create programming for the community. With questions regarding the Communications Department budget, contact Communications Coordinator Marty Dahl at 952-895-4402 or marty.dahl@ci.burnsville.mn.us.
So I think that should give you a general idea of what we'd be considering doing. We'd do a piece for each individual area within City Hall. As Heather noted in the background here, it would take some time up front, probably an equal amount of time as to what's being spent preparing for the budget house, at least in year one, but it would be something then that would be easy to update in subsequent years. We didn't have any closing to this yet, but that's where we would incorporate the information for the budget form. We'd have it right on the YouTube page, a link directly to that budget comment form for people to be able to provide input. I think with that, I'll open it up to any questions and discussion.
Well, I'm
Bill
sorry.
had his
I thought you were
hand up,
looking at me.
No, Bill had his hand up and then.
Marty, I assume that as part of your presentation, you'd show what the Department of Communications budget was, who gets what is salaries, what is equipment, et cetera, and break it down and do a comparative of last year for that particular part of the budget?
Yeah, we can get into as much or as little detail as we'd like, or as we're given direction to do. I know that it'll be a little bit difficult to talk about the upcoming budget until those numbers are a little more set, but it's definitely something that you could look at previous years. In 2011, this was how this department operated, or the parameters it operated under, with X% salary, X% operations.
Heather?
And certainly in the closing, we would direct them to the detailed budget document that's also available online to make sure that they had all of that history available as well. That may make the video really long to put it in the video, but certainly make sure that we know where people can get that information as well, how they can get that information.
Because my only concern is that some of our citizens that really pay attention to it might think that some of it's a little PR, a little colorful, and not enough information. I'm just second guessing and playing devil's advocate. It's not that I don't think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea because we've all been at the meetings where 2 people showed up. There are more of us there than the people that showed up. But if there are 400 people that click on something, obviously they'll respond. And some of those folks really do go over it with a fine-tooth comb. So.
Dan G., and then Mary, and then Kate.
I agree that we do have citizens out there that go over it with a fine-tooth comb, but they're going to do that whether we have an open house or we do this video. It's to have staff here for overtime for the evening or whatever, for 2 people, 2-3 years in a row now. This seems to make more sense where you can just get online and get the information you want. And I know the ones that really want to know what's going on, they'll pick up the phone and they're going to call you, or they're going to call Michelle, or they're going to call someone at the city, and they're going to talk to them about it because they want more information. And that information is always available to anybody that really wants to reach out.
And it's on the website.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
budget is always on the website. Mary?
Well, I like this. I was wondering whether we should even drop the idea together, which was an idea that I had gotten because Egan does a budget open house. I was terribly disappointed that we didn't get more people. And yet when I tell people about it, people would say, oh, it's a great idea, but they never came. So I like this. I think it's a good thing to try, and I think it has a great chance of reaching more people.
Dan K.?
I like the idea. Something I conveyed to Craig not long ago, and it was probably already well underway. It was, I think we need to adopt a technological approach to pushing information out, making it available on the web in various formats. And I would only suggest that the approach to the video be very parochial and simple, so the person who is the least plugged in and understanding of how any budget works, let alone a city budget, can understand it. And those that have been plugged in will be able to fire through it quicker and understand it even that much easier. But I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. No, I think we always have to adapt to find better solutions to inform and give information to our citizens. So I like the idea because, again, we're trying to reach more people. 2 versus 100 is more than what we had. The one thing that I would ask that we don't lose that I thought was very good with the budget open house is that in each department, people, you had the boards that said in each department how many employees were in each department. So I think because people want to know how many people are in communications and what is your budget and so forth. But then again, with each link, it drives them to the exact page that will give them more detail about the budget. I think that would be very helpful for everybody. So they can have the full budget, or they can just go to the page of the budget that speaks directly to that department's budget. So, but the number of employees, I think, is very important. Yeah. I like what we did also with Public Works, where it also told how many miles of streets we take care of. And also in the utilities and water, and so how many miles of pipes and how many miles, because what people don't see, they don't think about. But all of that stuff that's under the ground, we take care of, and it has a cost. So they need to know that. So I would hope that we don't lose that, because it's very important for people to know how many miles under the ground. And Steve, I think you've talked about there are more miles of pipe under the ground than there are roads above that we take care of. And that's not just water, there's sewer, and there's storm drainage and all of that. So there's a lot of stuff under the ground that we are responsible for, and they are assets of the community. Okay. Anything else? Thank you. I think we're moving forward with continuing the effort to inform our citizens and being transparent. Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda then is and this is the time in every cycle where we go through this, and this is the review of the mayor and city council's salary and benefits. And it's usually our city clerk, Michelle Brooks, but she is off today. Her father died, and so we pray for her and her family, and she'll be back next week. But our Human Resource Director, Jill Hansen, is present, and Heather Johnston, our CFO, is also present to address this issue.
Madam Mayor, I think members of the council, I will just give you a quick high level. You have the information. The city clerk, as you indicated, has surveyed both like jurisdictions. We have about 9 market cities that we compare ourselves to, and then other cities as well. And so she's also looked at the 10 cities to look at the compensation for both the mayor and the city council.
Okay, one moment. Councilmember Keeley?
The next thing in my deal is the extended budget discussion. Did we skip over that? Or are we coming
Oh, I'm
back?
sorry.
Do you want to go back to that?
It is the extended. I'm going to just suspend that and hold that thought.
Heather's involved in this one too, but I just thought, wasn't following along with what I was reading.
Can't we do them both at the same time?
Thanks, Anna.
We could probably not.
Okay, well, we're going to the extended budget. So everybody who is following and have the agenda in front of them, it's the extended budget discussion from June 26th. Craig Ebling and Heather, how's the vote?
Madam Mayor, I'll probably talk just a little bit, since I think I'm responsible for possibly conveying some misunderstandings to begin with regarding the deputy city manager position. Because we had talked in general terms in a couple different settings about the possibility of not replacing that. And and as you all know, we have been moving forward in the idea that we will not replace that position. I have to confess, I've been hedging my bets a little bit because we don't know for sure how this is going to work. But in the budget memorandum, we did suggest that for purposes of the budget, that we would eliminate this position. We would like to hold back maybe just a little bit and possibly request a small amount of money to maybe get some consultant help, lest a special project would come up from the council. But to clear any confusion, we are suggesting, as an option for the council, that we totally remove that position from the budget. So that was one clarification.
Bill?
My recollection is that, and maybe I was wrong, that we voted to agree to eliminate that, but then agreed based on some proposal, some number that you would put forth to reserve a certain amount for hiring a private contractor
Yeah.
to do some of those duties as the case may be. And that's my recollection, and
Okay.
That
Dan?
was pretty much how I had remembered it as well, that we were
Yeah.
going to save a portion of it
Yeah.
for a contractor if necessary, or if it didn't work, and we may have to hire someone.
Yeah.
And, who knows if Craig will be here next year, so we might have to, what that's going to cost us.
Yeah, and you know, that is also my recollection when we had the city manager's performance evaluation, that we wanted to make sure that you're not going to be overburdened. Right now, we have cut back so much on personnel across the organization, that it is concerning when you have that many folks. And I agree with that, with Bill and Dan, that was the recollection. Mary?
Mine too.
Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, that's what I walked away with in the last meeting, and
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, so I think that's it, the.
Good. Then the second thing that I was hoping to, at the risk of being obnoxious, is to restate kind of our understanding as to how we should prepare for our August meeting. And I put 3 bullets in the agenda background. Heather and I talked about this, and that is that it was our understanding that council wants more information about the impacts of the potential cost reductions that we've identified,
Yeah,
and that you would like for us to seek out some other ones, some other potential cost reductions, along with the explanation of their impacts, but also that we are to seek cost reduction methods or cost reduction approaches that do not have significant service level impacts. And my point here is that if we are to fully investigate some pretty massive $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 reductions from where we think we are now, at the ballpark that we're in right now, that will involve some major implications to the organization, and it has a lot of different ripple effects and so on. If council is open to that, of course, that's our duty, and we will do so, but that's not someplace that we would prefer to go if council is uncomfortable with the idea that we would have a budget that would entertain significant service reductions.
members of the council, any thoughts? One of the things that I'd like to remind the council is that part of our process is that in September, we do a max tax. That means we don't go above a particular limit. And then it allows us to continue working with our staff to the adoption of the budget in December. And when we do that, we always come away with a budget that we have agreed to. So are you open to allowing our staff to look at these implications? And where in August, we would agree to bringing forth a max tax levy, and then continue working till December when we adopt it. Here's my concern, to say to our staff that we only live with $87,000 of growth, when we promised our people that we will make good on their salaries and benefits, which is the bulk of this budget. It's about, Heather, 647, something like that?
647 in terms of the,
Of the actual cost of the
the increase for the
employee-
personnel services, thank you,
Yes.
it's about 650,000.
Yes.
About that, yes.
I was just remembering, yeah. So, 87,000 was what the increase was. If you look at things from a business perspective, you can't do that. That's more cuts. And that's what I think, Craig, you were speaking to. If it's $700,000 that we're going to ask you to cut, it's going to even mean a lot more.
It would have significant service implications.
Absolutely.
And significant staff level implications,
So,
which,
Yeah.
as I said, is our duty to investigate that if we're directed to do so. It's not something that I would prefer to do
Yeah.
unless council clearly is intentional in entertaining that possibility.
well, I look at the surveys that we received from our businesses and from our citizens, and 92% of them say that the city is going in the right direction. We have also made some very tough decisions to ensure that we have a very level and less volatile budget in our city, and where we always have a strong financial position. I really would not like for us to have that eroded because of ideology. I would like for us to be very prudent in our thinking long-term for the good and welfare of this city moving forward. Mary?
Well, I said it when we had this discussion last month, and I'll say it again, and that is that in 2009, we had to slash the budget because we were getting cuts in the state funding. And then we looked at the 2010 budget, and it was, we just felt it had to still be a very austere budget. And at that time, I was the deciding vote to make that a zero increase in the budget. I said last time when we had this discussion that we took our bitter medicine at that time, but like good medicine, you can also take too much of it and kill the patient. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to really impact our service level. I do think that staff has been very, very conscientious over the years that I've been on council in continuing to find, to streamline ways of doing things and to find more efficient ways of doing things. And I'm talking from top-level management down to the front line. I'm really impressed. In the city of Burnsville, I do not see that old saying, two people working, one person working and two watching. I don't. And there was a big construction project, and I know it was contracted out in my neighborhood, but there were still a lot of city workers around, in and out, all working really, really hard. So I know this happens on the front line as well. And so to that point, I just don't want to consider a big reduction in staff or services.
Dan? G.
I agree with you, Mary. It's, over the years, I've watched staff work diligently at making things happen. We sat in a budget meeting, 2 weeks ago, or when Steve said, oh, I could do $100,000 less this year. We'll get by. We'll make it happen. I watched Terry from Park say, yeah, okay, we can delay some of this for a while, and we can make it happen. And so, I don't see our management people with their hands out saying, I need more for this, I need more for that. I mean, they constantly, and they have been doing this for a long time, and quite frankly, a lot of this that was happening when we were having good times in the city, that the staff was very, very conscious about levels they wanted to keep things at. And I don't know what more we can cut out of our city. There's so much that's been done, and we've adjusted. I think staff's done a good job of adjusting. I think our citizens have done a good job of adjusting. Our volunteers have really stepped up to help with all the things that have happened. And I mean, I think, everybody is in this together in this city, it seems like. But you're right, you get to the point where you're supposed to take the medicine until it's done, but then it can kill you too. So you got to be careful with that.
Bill and Dan, you have, yeah, Dan?
Well, I think the reason we're having this discussion all over again, because there's a lot of deja vu right now, is some clarification that staff was looking to clear up. And then I'm assuming that there wasn't a clear message, or staff didn't feel that there was a clear message given the last time we had this discussion, and they're looking for some solid direction as to what they want to do or what they're supposed to do. I agree with the statements that the background points out. Number one, staff is to prepare more information on the impacts of the potential cost reductions already identified. Staff is to identify other potential cost reduction suggestions along with the explanations of their impacts on service levels. And council we seek ideas for reductions that have cost benefits realized with small or no significant service level impacts. They're very broad statements, but they do provide some direction.
And that's the direction we gave 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and if the request from staff, and it's fair, because if I was them and I read that, I would say, can you fine tune that a little bit for me? I, for one, since I was the vocal one on trying to live on new money, I want to know what the options are even if some of those interpretations of a small or no significant service level impacts, what would it be to try and get that 4.5% that we're projected to be down to something that's a lot more realistic in this economy, in my opinion. I don't think we can just throw 4 and 5% increases on taxpayers' backs. We know that the dollar amount for a business on $1 million property was fairly substantial. And, you know, yes, there's a lot we have to do as a city, but I never want to lose sight of the fact that our purpose here is to not status quo anything. And I don't believe we do.
We don't.
But we have to provide that challenge for staff. It's a burden they bear, and I feel for them because it's a burden. I mean, it's not easy to sit down and say, how can we do this differently? How can we do it for a lower cost and still kind of achieve the same outcome of the quality of that service level, but get to it different ways? What kind of partners can we bring in? How can we just throw away the way we do it now and come up with a whole new way of doing it? It's not easy, but it's our job, and it's their job, and we do it. And they've done it phenomenally well. If we didn't go through that recession, it wasn't state cuts per se. It was just, the
They
economy was.
they never paid it.
Yeah,
They never
the market
paid-
value homestead
yeah.
credit, but it was more than that. I mean, it was just a terrible economy that was heading down very quickly. And it forced us into the position of, okay, we can't just pass a 4 or 5% increase. We have to make significant cuts. And some phenomenal ideas that would never potentially have ever surfaced came out of the necessity to be innovative in how we do our budget. So I don't want to leave that because I don't think we're out of the woods. I think it's going to be a very slow go in the economy, and I don't want us to sit back on our laurels and say, well, we need 4.5%, so let's do it. We have the brightest, best people. We've added some of the brightest, best people recently. I feel wonderful to be a part of the city and have the staff and the intellect and the brain trust that exists in this staff is, rises to every occasion. And so my interpretation of that second one, I guess, the staff is to identify other potential cost reduction suggestions along with their explanations is, I think some of that needs to cut deep. Does it need to be $1 million in cuts? No, of course not. But it needs to get us, and I think what they're looking for is, just where do we need to take that list of suggestions, how deep, so you can then make some decisions based on what we're able to bring back to you. And I don't know if that's a number of 1.5, 2, what, but
Yeah.
I just know it's not 4 or 4.5.
Yeah.
And by any stretch.
And I think they understand that from us also, and that's what took place three weeks ago. One of the things that I think we also need to make sure is that we do not want to lose or erode the strength of our financial position. I hope that is something that we all agree on, that we do not want to, because that has a direct impact when we're evaluated by the rating agencies. So we don't want to lose that. But I think 1 and 2 are the directions that we gave to staff. And I think if you're okay with us working with staff on other potential costs as we go down, because I think we have shaved off from the 4% with what happened 3 weeks ago. But we can work on continuing to shave off, but not at the expense of destroying how well we have our financial position. Bill?
Well, sort of the way I see it is staff generally does a very good job in their different presentations. For example, you did an excellent job laying out 4 options for us for the quadrant. You might have 8 options all the way to a 0 budget increase. At least then if we make a decision, come to a consensus, and one of our citizens say, well, you voted for 1.5% in this setting. And then I can explain, go back and look, because we would have had to lay off 4 law enforcement officers, or, here are the circumstances. Really, it's all about what is the reality and what are our choices, and what are the facts, and why do we make those choices. So, Craig, I don't think there was any demand, I didn't hear any demand of a zero budget increase. That's always our goal. That's our hope and our goal. But all of us want you to do your best. But then there might be 10 options, and we may come to a consensus on option number 7 or 8. I don't know, but, or, so then it's not just it's just not a number. It's a number with whatever the reality is, whatever the factual reality. That would be what I would hope would happen.
Yeah, Craig, and for me, it is really important to really understand the impact on this community on some of these, whatever those options might be. Because that, at the end of the day, is why we have the businesses that we have here and the people who choose to live here. And then also, how much is it per month for each of the services, for public safety? And I think one time in our budget, we did that. We took it down right to on a monthly basis. If you pay X amount of dollars per year for your property tax, what does that mean? And if you lay it out like in a check register, police op, and actual, not percentages. Here's how much you pay for it. Here's how much you pay for public works. Here's how much you pay for parks, per month. And then people will have a better understanding of the grasp of what that means on a monthly basis.
I would agree. It's always better to break things down to what
Actual.
people deal with every day, and
That's
that
right.
is, they pay their bills monthly.
That's right, and that's what they
Groceries
look at.
weekly, probably, and gas every week, but, we sort of live in that fiscal cycle of monthly costs, and that can certainly help put it in perspective.
Yeah.
We still will grapple with the sum total, but I don't disagree that putting it in terms of what that monthly cost is
Yeah.
for, to have a safe city. And it's
Yeah.
critical to have a strong police force and have a safe city, because then people will want to live here and work here and open up a business here. But
That's right.
if it's not, they won't.
They won't.
So that's important. And, my issue with, and I brought up at our last discussion, is I think it's important, and I think people expect us to take care of what we have.
Yes.
And, we had to make some tough decisions on some of that maintenance area when things got excruciatingly tight. And they certainly aren't like they were in '08 and '09. And I want to make sure that we take care of what we have.
We have to. It's our
our
fiduciary
priorities.
responsibility
Right.
to
And I
take care
think
of those assets.
we're back, I think we've put pretty much everything back the way it was. There's been some changes, and good changes, because we were doing things that we didn't have to, but we chose to as a city for a long time. And we, based on the emails that we continually get, we still have an education piece with the community on what we do and what they're responsible to do. And when you can't take gimmies away. So every time we take a gimme, like sidewalks and boulevard mowing, it causes problems. So, so that's just an education piece. And everybody needs to understand that in today's world, citizen involvement in local government is how local governments are going to survive going forward, because budgets will never be what they were in the 90s and the early 2000s ever again. Just is the way it is.
Yeah, and we do have a great citizenry here in Burnsville when you look at the amount of people who volunteer their time, so it's just
Yep.
really terrific. Craig, do you
We'll
have
go to work.
everything? Okay, thank you.
We'll go to work.
Okay, thanks. Okay, now, item number 5.
Madam Mayor, I think I'll give it another try.
Okay.
In order this time. The review of the mayor and council salaries and benefits, as I indicated, our city clerk, Michelle Brooks, did survey our 9 market cities as well as 10 additional cities, and you have that information in your background. As you can see, Burnsville falls fairly close to the middle of the pack with monthly salaries for the mayor and council. And if there is a, state law requires, Minnesota statutes 415-11, requires that elected official salaries must be adopted by ordinance and published prior to the November election. And then they would take effect by January 1st. And so you cannot set the compensation for your own council, but for the next council. And so you would want to make a decision on whether there would be changes to the compensation probably before October 1st in order to have sufficient time to make the ordinance changes and have those published and put into effect. So with that, I believe you have all the information in the background in terms of comparability, as I mentioned. It really, the mayor and council monthly compensation is within mid-range of market cities for our communities.
Okay.
With that, I stand for questions.
Council, what would you like to do?
As much as I'd like a raise anytime, my position is we continue to be in hard times,
Yeah.
that we vote to have no raise, which with inflation essentially means we lose 2%, 3%, whatever. And I know that's been quite a while on this council, and
Yeah, we haven't had a raise for a long time,
Yeah.
but that's okay. That's not why we do this job.
Madam Mayor, it's been since 2009 that there has not been an increase since 2008, actually.
2000
Yeah, 2007 was the last
increase.
5 years ago.
Every 2
Yeah.
years.
2007.
I agree with Bill. I
yeah.
think, let's just leave it.
Yeah.
I was going to say this is a good place for a budget cut.
He's right. Yeah, he wrote 50% cut on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I think the council is underpaid for all the work that everyone does on the council. But yeah, I agree, it's not a good time for
It's
it.
10 cents an hour.
But yeah, can we do it,
After
you know,
taxes,
what was it, Scranton or one of those cities went, put it down to minimum wage? Actually, if you guys got minimum wage, you'd be
They
making
do.
more than you are. You'd be making more than you are now.
We're way below minimum wage.
That's what
10
they
cents
did.
an hour, 24/7.
Every city employee was put on minimum wage in Scranton because the council would not, based on, would allocate a certain amount of funds, so the mayor's response was that he allocated it and cut
Yeah.
wages accordingly,
Minimum wage.
and was
Okay.
sued the next day.
All right.
think?
So I think everybody, Dan, did you have anything else?
No,
to-
I concur.
So no raises. We'll move on.
We'll continue to, it looks like other cities have given themselves a
Yeah.
raise, because we're behind the average now.
We
but,
are.
You know, even when times get better, it'll still be a difficult decision to vote a raise in this. But I'm very happy that the council is compensated something, and that we're offered some benefit options, and
Yeah.
there's no reason for us to change this.
No raises. Okay, now we go to roundtable. And the first item on a roundtable discussion is the discussion on the transient merchant license at flea markets.
And I had asked to have this put on the discussion for this evening. I was confused by what we had done with the secondhand retail and the transit merchants license. And I assumed, and I was told when I asked if this applicant would be treated like we do Antiques Minnesota and Touch a Home and that they would be the same, and they are under the resellers. But the transit is a different deal, and where everybody that comes into the swap meet or the flea market, whatever you want to call it, has to have their own license. And so what I want to know from the council, and we should have this discussion, do we really think we need a license for every grandmother that makes beaded jewelry to sell at a flea market, or we need a license for someone that sells jerseys or takes photos and does that? My assumption was that we would license people that sell things that we call out in our resellers ordinance, like with Pawn America, that these are the reportable items. We want to know who's selling those items and what they're selling. And I think the applicant had looked at it that way as well. And it turns out, no, it was everybody. And again, I know the object is to protect our citizenry, but there is that buyer beware too. If I go buy a pair of sunglasses from a merchant at a flea market. I don't need my city government telling me that, oh, I've checked him out and he's good for you or he's not good for you and that sort of thing. And when I talked to Joel Jamek about this a little bit, our city attorney, this also would affect the, from what he told me, the Touch a Home junk market that they have, that they actually fall under this ordinance as well. And they would require their people to all get licenses, from what our city attorney told me 2 weeks ago. So this is affecting not only a new business that's trying to get established here in Burnsville, but businesses that already exist in Burnsville. I did go out to the flea market last week just to see what was going on, and I think he had like 9 vendors out there out of the 40-some that had signed up because of this licensing thing that happened. And a sad story, and it's anecdotal, I guess, not even anecdotal, my daughter told me. Her and her friends went out to that flea market and saw 9 vendors, and so they left and went down to Elko where they had like over 100 vendors at their swap meet, and that's where they hung out and spent their money that day. And I know we want to protect people from things, but sometimes I think we get a little too overzealous in our regulation and you know, in the economy today and the way people are starting new businesses because, quite frankly, they have to. I think we have to give some people some latitude sometimes. And I'd like this council to look at how this transit license works. I mean, do we seriously, does, you know, Aunt B really have to tell me when she makes a postcard that you have to get a license from us when she rents space at a swap meet or a flea market to sell those things?
I've been doing a lot of thinking about this after Mr. and Mrs. Wallace, I believe, came to before us and speak to us at the last council meeting. And one of the things that we could consider is that on some of this is that the license of the operator should cover, because the operator will go under the investigation by our ordinance. But then they would have to tell us how many of their vendors would be responsible for. So if somebody complains about a product that they bought and that the product was faulty or it would have to go back to the operator of so that license would cover. But they would have to tell us who the vendors are that is under their license.
Right.
And not the.
Much like our reseller's license does right now at Antiques Minnesota, that it all goes through a central.
Yeah, but so I was thinking that's one solution that we could work on. And I know that, Dan Kay, you had some concerns about resellers' license, whether they're being, are we complying with the spirit of that license? So I'm thinking as we look at some of these new opportunities or businesses that are coming, I think, Dan, when you speak about some of it was before these kinds of opportunities.
Well, I'm aware of
And
that. I'm aware of that.
we had to make sure that we are looking at transients. This is something different. So we need to address it differently.
Yes.
So that's where I'm thinking it should fall under the operator's license, but they would have to tell us who those people are, who those vendors are, so that we know if there's a complaint to police, where to go to. Dan?
Well, I would concur with that, and I share Dan's interpretation of it, and you got to get into the weeds of the ordinance to interpret it, and I think staff interpreted it the way it's written today. We need to change it. My only concern was if a person was dealing in a reportable
Yes.
precious metal or gemstone, they would have to have their own individual license as everybody else does. But if it's crafts and things that aren't reportable that we've excluded from our secondhand dealers, which we have a lot of secondhand dealers in the city that don't deal in any reportable goods, and that owner's permit or license would cover those people, just like, to me, that's the model of Antiques Minnesota. There's nothing that I'm aware of that they do that fell under our reportable or precious gems or precious metals. And so the one covered everything. And that's what I thought would happen in this situation. So my only concern was those people dealing in those precious metals or reportable items. They would have to have their own license, have the background
That's
check,
right.
and report the items. But all the other products that we've said in our secondhand dealer license we don't care about tracking, they shouldn't have to.
Yeah. And
So I think our ordinance is not written to support that, and that's what we need to change.
Yeah, and I think we can get at amending it, and so that can happen. Mary?
Well, this sounds like a reasonable solution to the problem, but I do have a question for Jenny. What about craft shows that are at the Burnsville Center? Various churches have them. Do they have to? Do they require the people who are selling from their little card tables or their booths to have these licenses? Are they considered transient merchants?
Councilmember Sherry, members of the council, I am no expert on the transient merchant license.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I can tell you, we don't require the land use clearance. That's, the conditional use permit deals with outdoor sales, so if it's indoors,
Yeah.
it's not. I know we don't currently license like the Touch a Home, we don't get transient merchant license for them. We don't for Art and All the Jazz, Fire Muster, all those other vendors that have
International
other
Festival.
carts
Yeah.
outside. We don't do that. And I think someone brought this up.
Yeah.
Could they fall under it? They just might, under the
Yeah.
way that it's
Yeah.
written.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that what you proposed is a common sense solution. But I'm concerned about Mr. Wallace and his business. I mean, can we do something quickly? I mean, I don't want to have to go through a whole lot of.
Well, I think if we can have staff take a look at it and bring something to be adopted at our next council meeting. Yep, Jenny?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we have on there, because we talked at our last work session about other changes to the transient merchant. Captain Giske and myself and Joel had presented on that. So we had intended to bring those changes to you at your next meeting. If I can huddle everybody together tomorrow and we can come up with the language, then we can adopt that at our next at your next meeting.
There we go.
We'll make that
Yeah.
effort.
Yeah.
The problem is, isn't he operating this weekend?
Yeah.
And he'd have to wait another week for us to clear this problem out of his way, or can we
Yeah.
put a
Well,
a
here's.
temporary,
No, what we can do is, once staff puts the language together, we can call a special meeting to address this one subject.
by Thursday this week?
I want to make sure we read it.
Yeah, I know,
And-
I think we need to take our time on the ordinance change. I think we need to put something in place as a council now to allow him to move forward as he thought he was going to, and as I thought, and Dan thought he was
And I
going to
thought.
be able to,
Yep.
and you thought.
Yeah.
So what can we do tonight that can give him the latitude to adhere to the secondhand dealers ordinances for those control
Well, okay.
items
I'm
and
gonna
allow the
ask-
rest to
I'm
operate
going to ask
under the...
Craig, Jenny, because we don't have Joel here tonight, what we can do. Did you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to, what was it, a year ago or 2 years ago when we were doing the Parkway and our sign ordinance? We put a moratorium on it that night and said.
We did.
Until we could get through the ordinance to figure out what we were going to do. And I think a moratorium makes sense, just.
A
we're ta- we're ta- we're
moratorium on
talk-
what?
On enforcing this transient merchant out there. He understands what needs to be done. We know the direction we're going. It gives staff time to put it together, get the ordinance together, and allow him to operate this weekend. And then we're going to meet next week, and then we can talk about it and do it. We know we're going to change it, so why, I don't want to penalize the business owner any more than
Agreed.
he's already been hurt.
Maybe it's a temporary exclusion until the new ordinance is put in place.
Yeah,
and-
but then I would also want to make sure that those merchants that's going to fall under your license, that you identify them. Craig and Jenny, what are your thoughts? I mean, because we're really getting into something, I don't want this to get too messy.
I
Wait.
think we could propose language that we can pass tonight to give them a temporary exclusion from the current yada yada ordinance. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but until the new ordinance is brought back to us. That would free them up for being able to operate this weekend. And we could put in the language to request a list of what vendors are operating under his license, and those that would operate in secondhand reportable goods would still have to go through the permit, or the license process.
Craig?
Well, you can tell I
What-
had to take my coat
I
off.
was just going to say that.
Get
Hot here.
Well,
I
from-
don't
from-
think
from-
we have enough time to have a special council meeting.
Okay.
Notice
Agreed.
that.
Yeah.
We're not ready. We'd have to have something prepared by the time we notice it. I think it would be the weekend.
So can we
I wish
do it
I had
under?
Joel here.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. I don't know that we can do this. What Councilmember Keeley
Yeah.
don't know.
We did it with the
I don't
signs.
know.
No,
Well,
no.
We did it with
Title
those
10
signs.
Title 10 zoning ordinance.
Yeah, I'm going
moratorium
to,
is-
Jenny, and then I'll go to Bill.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, we did waive the enforcement of the sign ordinance, but I think that was after proper notification and meeting notifications, and I don't know if that was a public hearing, and there may be some statutory requirements on moratorium,
I
so.
think I brought that up at a meeting, and we took care of it immediately.
Did it.
Yeah, and I'm
no,
not saying
there
you
was-
can't do it. I think there might be a procedural or legal thing, and that's why I'm with Craig. I wish
Yeah.
Joel was here
And
to answer
For me,
that.
too. I just don't want to get messy. Bill?
Call 1-800, it's legal, and get an opinion.
Here he is.
Oh, wait a minute.
I'm, of course, personally of the mind, I would like this gentleman to be operated as business. My only concern is technically a moratorium is something that is chosen not to be enforced.
That's right.
This would be a conditional moratorium, and I think I don't know if there is such
We're
animal.
We're already doing
illegal.
one of those right now.
What are we doing right now?
We're not enforcing our parking ordinance.
But do we,
But what
do we,
part?
Our 5,000
do
pound
we,
limit parking
do we
ordinance.
vote on that?
No, but we're not
We're
enforcing
just-
it. We're consciously
No,
not
but we're-
enforcing it. The police told us
Oh,
they weren't.
yeah, we didn't take an action to not do it. We're just
What
not
I'm
doing it.
saying
We're
is
just not
that we're
doing it.
trying to
Yeah, that's
impose
a whole different-
language
yeah.
in
very
in what we describe as a moratorium. A moratorium is something then that we don't, a moratorium of enforcing an ordinance
That's-
as written versus adding additional conditions. And again, that's unfortunately the lawyer in me has concerns, although I want to see this separate from not being a lawyer, somehow find a way to help this gentleman.
And I'm with you, Bill. I want to help, but I don't want things to get so messy that we also come back and say, oh, we did it for this, and then we did it for this, and then it becomes creepy, and then we're going to, and we don't have all of the information. As much as I would like to have the Wallaces, I want to make sure that we are not creating so much of a mess for us as we move to the future.
So I'm going to look to Craig
Yeah.
to ask his
Well, I think they're
thoughts.
trying to find out what Joel would say. And Joel is sick.
Joel's sick. We just tried to call him on his cell phone, we can't.
I mean, we have voting authority.
Yeah. Moratorium
Yeah.
is, as I understand it, relates to land use.
Yes,
Title 10.
that's
There's a
right.
specific statute
That's
that
right.
allows cities to declare a moratorium on certain aspects of the zoning ordinance. This is a licensing thing.
That's right.
I am no attorney, but this does not seem to be a parallel to that.
No, it isn't.
Now, it is true that by virtue of our ability to to enforce certain ordinances from time to time because of staffing, that there are some ordinances that don't get enforced.
A lot of them don't get enforced.
I'm a little, I think Joel would be a little squirmy to have council
Yeah.
direct staff to not enforce an ordinance.
That's right. I don't think we did that.
Perhaps,
Remember doing that?
Well,
I wonder if,
I don't think it's clean.
I
to-
don't think it's
to-
clean.
To do it that way.
I just-
perhaps we could have council direct staff to exercise whatever legal maneuver, whatever legal actions can be taken to
Then we
assist
will, and then we
the
will,
suspension of the enforcement of this to the extent that it's legal, and then have Joel weigh in on it and do whatever we can to help.
Yes,
We
and
understand the
then-
council's desire here.
and then we can adopt it retroactive.
Sure.
Okay, that's
So-
a solution.
Yeah, that we, to the extent that it's permitted
That-
by law, we will work towards suspending the enforcement of this ordinance as it
Well,
relates.
the license.
The
It's
license.
the license.
The-
It's- If we mix up our words, that's where the confusion comes.
Yeah.
Isn't,
Pending the final resolution of the
That's-
ordinance
yes.
Yeah.
amendment.
when you got to, you brought up, or somebody brought up, proper notice.
Yes.
Wasn't this
This was
roundtable item
noticed.
notice that we've taken
We're
up
gonna-
the
we're gonna
discussion
have
on
this discussion,
transient
has been
license
Yeah,
places?
this was,
It
this
is.
was.
So why can't we
Big
suspend the
action.
license for now?
Well,
officially?
one of the things, I think the more elegant solution is to direct staff,
Well,
as Craig
Yeah,
says.
We don't have an ordinance
We don't-
amendment in front of us.
We don't.
We don't have the language.
Language, we don't
amendment.
have any of that.
Yes, I believe if we had the ordinance amendment here in front of us, you could
You
enact
could-
it tonight.
That's right, but we don't.
We don't have that.
And so I think what Craig is suggesting is better and cleaner, is that staff will work with Mr. Wallace, and then we can adopted retroactively since staff understands the direction of our thoughts on this item.
Yeah, to the extent that's permissible by law, we're directed to suspend the application of the transient merchant license
Yeah,
into the situation.
Pertaining to
pertaining to non-metal, reportable.
Unreportable.
Yes, but then that, on the others, that, I just want to make sure that when the people have a way of addressing something that they feel they have not, an item that they don't feel that was, so they can go back to the owner of the business, just like we do in everything else.
So we can just direct without having to make a motion then?
We're directing staff to look at,
All right.
yeah, it's a direction, and then we will retroact
Perfect.
at the next council.
Yeah, we'll go to work. Ms. Faulkner is saying that we'll go to work tomorrow to prepare the ordinance amendments for your consideration next week, assuming that we can humanly get that done. But this is, in addition to that, I wrote that to the extent permissible by law, staff is directed to suspend the transit merchant's license application to flea markets absent the otherwise reportable transactions.
Thank you.
That works. Okay. I just don't want us to get into areas that we become so messy that then, well, we did it over here, then we can do it over here. That's when it becomes messy. And then it just creeps. Okay, the next item, and this is an item, members of the council, that I had asked staff to bring back, and this is this is in regards to the rental license program. And since this was before us, and it was published in the paper, and management groups from the multi-housing went back to the owners and shared with them what the rental license was about. I had phone calls and letters that was shared with Ms. Faulkner and Craig Ebling, our city manager. And I see here this evening is Mr. Jerry Frisch, who is the owner of Park Place on Burnsville Parkway. And I don't think the owner of the Pines is here tonight, but Jenny, you have his letter. What I would like for us to do is that we do have some very good owners of multi-housing in our community. And the cost of the license was something that they wanted to talk about. And Mr. Frisch, would you like to come to the table and share with us? Because you're not in opposition to what we're doing.
Not at all.
You are in support of what we're doing. And you are also, what you had shared with me is that you would say, okay, we don't have very many calls that have to do with property maintenance or any of that. But you're saying you can, 20% of my units you can inspect, because that also benefits you if they're going to, and it can be a random inspection. You don't have to tell them which 20%. But do you want to speak to what you had shared with me?
Yes, Madam Mayor and members of the council, I'm Gerald Frisch. I own Park Place Apartments on 301 and 501 East Burnsville Parkway. It's a family-owned business. We're very proud of our property. We make the proper investments. We take care of our tenants. They're our residents. They're our customers. And we're fortunate to be in a good community. This is a great community, Burnsville. I live in Mendota Heights, so I'm right down the road from you. And when I had the opportunity to build in this community, and I built and I owned the property, I thought it was a good investment. And that's what I have maintained. And other property owners that are successful in maintaining their property and keeping their tenancy correct and retaining tenants and doing the proper thing, we almost run a concierge service for our tenants. We don't want to be poisoned because there's some bad owners that own property and they don't live up to their obligations. What I'm concerned with is that the ordinance that you passed was a shotgun effect, and really what you're looking for is a rifle effect to be able to cure the problem of having inadequate housing in your community. The cost that I reflected upon, that my property manager told me, was $10,000 for us to be licensed in your community, which I thought was really unfair because we haven't violated anything. We brought everything to code continuously, made improvements. We were awarded a landscaping medal award a couple of years ago, and I'm here to suggest that perhaps even a 5% review of those existing apartments, 10%, you mentioned 20%, that certainly is better than 100% inspection. But once we pass the basic level of being a good owner, landlord, we shouldn't be penalized with a large license fee because we are doing everything proper. I'm here to ask you to review that and look back upon the cost to the property owners. We pay a substantial amount of real estate taxes. We pay fees to the Burnsville City. We do everything we can to be a good citizen, and we want some consideration for running a good property. I'm here to respond to any questions that you have relative to that.
Dan?
Are you saying that initially the fee would work, but as you kind of show the city that you are a good property owner, that you'd have a sliding fee that would
I think
would
that
change with what we find once we're there and go, you know, these guys are pretty good, so let's not charge them as much as we would the initial ones or the ones that we're having trouble with. Because I know the original rental licensing was a free deal, and then we went after the bad guys. Unfortunately, the bad guys got pretty bad, and there was a reaction like, we cannot allow this to happen. And because we weren't inspecting, we didn't find out till way after the fact that how bad these guys really were. And so I hear what you're saying. I do kind of like I don't like a lot of fees on our landlords, but I also know we have to inspect. I know we have to get ahead of it, and I do like the idea of possibly having a fee out there to get it going.
initial fee.
And the initial fee to get it going, and then the properties that we find that are in compliance consistently and doing what they're supposed to do consistently, maybe we have a different level fee for that particular property, and then the bad guys, we just continue to have to charge the higher fees to. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Substantially what I'm saying, I
Yeah,
think that's
and
one of
it's
the
a tiered
approach.
approach that Jenny talked about at the very beginning also. Bill?
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that. I mean, with due respect to Dan Keeley, he brought up the tiered approach towards the end of the discussion. I have to admit, I poo-pooed it simply because I thought it would make it a lot more complicated. But asking you this question, my understanding is the way you're proposing, it'd just be a random 10%. Right now, as I recall, my recollection is the statute had us over a 3-year period looking at all apartments in each unit, each rental unit over 3 years. And your proposal then is 10% over 3 years. Is that correct?
My suggestion is that if the inspector comes in, if he chooses any apartment he wants to review, 10%,
No, but
15%.
I'm just going on his,
Yeah.
Whatever
was saying 10 or 20.
whatever the inspector would choose, and we pass the initial test, there's no need, appears to me, to go through the other 90% of the
right.
property
No,
and charge us that
No, I'm
fee.
just trying to summarize what you're saying.
And that's what I hope I'm communicating.
And so say we accepted that it was a random 20%. I'm just curious, how would you, because before, again, I'm bad at math, it was easy, I wish we didn't have to do any of this, because I don't like, if government could stay out of private enterprise business, we would. Unfortunately, been forced to do this because of the bad apples. But having said that, how would you charge that fee to your renters? Because before, you could allocate a certain amount to each renter because it would be done over 3 years. Here you have a random 10%. How would you, as a landlord, cover that cost?
We'd have to absorb it. And that's what the problem is, that you absorb the 100% inspection when it isn't necessary. When you walk in the door, I have instructed my staff to say, welcome to Park Place Apartments, the cleanest apartments in Burnsville. We have staff on duty. We have 171 units, so staff is there, live in the building 24 hours. My own son is the manager of the complex, lives in there, and is there instantaneously. And we enforce all of our rules and regulations, not like some people. This is a major investment for me and for my family, and I'm sure that there are other complexes that have similar situations. So if you come in and you see that it meets basic requirements, I don't think it's a necessity to go through the whole building.
So my question to you, Craig, would be, sorry if I can continue the thought, would be, so say he survives his 10%, which he would, and then we don't have to follow up, so we do a random 10% of similar, like a country village, and then we find a lot worse. Yeah, I mean, before it was easy because we would see all of them and we wouldn't have to pick and choose to keep going. You know what I'm saying? Because we'd see them. We'd see all the good or bad. But if we revised it, which I hope we can find a way to do it, then what would trigger then us looking at the next 10% or 20% or 90%? So, do you see what I'm trying to ask?
Sort of and not exactly,
what if
because
we-
I think
what
this
if-
is an administrative nightmare.
Right, what if?
I have no idea how we would handle this.
Right, what if
The whole premise of what we came up with is that we have so many apartments, we were going to inspect them all, and that is how we knew how much revenue we were going to generate. And it was a fairly nominal amount. And that would allow us to have the staff so that we could, in an orderly fashion, go through and inspect these units. This is going to, I don't even know how we'd go about
So,
doing
and then again, that's my question, if it triggered a further investigation?
Yeah.
Then.
If we were going to try, I think the concept here, and we get this, the concept here is to say, we have some very responsible folks that are doing this. How can we not lump them in the same way that we handle our problem inspectors? What I would think a better way to do it is to have some sort of a base fee.
Yeah.
A base fee, because we've tried zero.
We
We've tried
tried
zero, and we found
base
out that
fee.
that doesn't work.
Yeah, and a
We
base
got
fee,
ourselves
you're
into a
not
lot of trouble.
objecting to a base fee.
So we have a base fee, and
Yeah.
then if there are, and by the way, I think that we do need to inspect every unit. We would have a base fee, and then if we have multiple re-inspections, that then we jack up those costs and realize that there are costs being incurred, and that in turn would reflect in a lower base fee. That, I think, would be administratively doable and probably defensible, but I can't really imagine how we can do this.
Okay, Jenny, and then I'll come to Mary, and then,
My recollection, council, is when we talked about this too, was because we talked about the tiering, and it is or can be potential for a nightmare. How would we do that? And we've thought about that, and it just seems complicated and overwhelming. I think the direction I got from you was that let's inspect all the units every 3 years, and let's talk about it annually, how we're doing. Let's talk about it after 3 years, and then we have a baseline, because we've been through every unit. We'll have an idea of how good they are, how bad they are, which properties are good, which ones aren't so good, in addition to what Craig's talking about, having the fees for the multiple users of our inspectors having to go back out there because they can't get things quite right that are using our services. Then we'll have a baseline to have this conversation, I think, with more knowledge and more insight into what exactly we're dealing with our housing stock, because we really don't know. We know when problems come up. We have one property that is completely vacant. I can tell you there's another one right behind it, right behind it.
Yeah.
We had a garbage unit come up today in a very well-respected apartment building in Burnsville. You would be surprised. And we found it. So and they've got good management, and they will work with that, but it was there. So I would just throw out those thoughts to you.
okay, Mary? And then I'll
Well,
go-
first of all, I have a friend who lives in one of your buildings, and you do not exaggerate. She just raves about the wonderful attention that she gets as a tenant, and also the care that you give to the the physical place as well. And one thing that when I knew that this was going to come up, I reviewed the discussion in the background that we had before. And a concern I have is that if we don't have a fee for licensing, is that then when we do have a fee, it's punitive. it looks like it's punitive, and I don't think that was our intent. I think our intent was to make sure that everything, not only the apartment buildings, but as I'm noticing, because I've got this background up here, we also say single-family homes, too, will have an inspection. So I would like to know, maybe Jenny can come up with something that would be workable, but I just think we've got to we got to stick with our main idea, which is everybody has to pay for a license.
Dan?
Yes, I'll regurgitate what I brought up the last time, and this gentleman hit right on it. I don't want to penalize the good operators, and so I don't want a flat line type of structure. And so Mr. Eveling brought up, ideally, the solution that I think is workable, and that is drive the base fee down significantly and penalize those who have, where the inspectors have to keep going back or go back because they found problems. And so it becomes really a very low cost for the initial inspection, very low. And when there are problems found, that's where the fees go up. And so therefore, those owners who have violations of the code, they're paying ultimately for the salary of the support, that inspector, not those good operators that get, clean bills of health as far as everything being within code. And we just have to come up with that scale.
Would that be something that is workable? Because I know when we talked about, you're okay with paying the base fee.
Yes, I'm happy to have, number one, to pay a fair fee. Number two, I'm glad to see that we're enforcing
Yes.
the bad housing operators that, number one, don't
Gives
provide
everybody
good
a
housing.
bad
Number
name.
two, give us a bad name. Number three, we're trying to do as best we can with a tough economy. Rents are stabilized, taxes are high. We do a lot of maintenance work. We replaced all of our toilets this last year, replaced air conditioners again, continuously make our tenants comfortable so we retain them as opposed to a transitory type of an apartment complex. I appreciate the fact that I've got a good
You do have a
report over
wonderful
here.
reputation.
And fire chief for your city used to live in our building, and we've tried to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
a good neighbor and right down the street
Yeah.
in the heart of the city. So I'm proud to be here, and I'm happy to be here. I just don't want to be penalized for something that we don't do, and other people are causing us problems.
Okay. You know, one of the things that, Council, we used to do, and I know, Jenny, you went through this with the management group, but usually when we do policy issues like this, is that we have the white paper where you present something, and then people can respond to it, like Mr. Frisch can respond to it. We did not have that part in our discussion. And then you go back, just like our rental licensing from the very beginning, and work with the owners and find the best solution for us to move forward. Because I'm not hearing you say, no, I don't want to pay a fee. But we want it to be fair.
I want it to be fair, and I want you to be able to enforce
Yeah.
the code and give people good housing. We're very sensitive about
Yes.
bad reputation.
Yeah.
Tenants are not second-rate citizens. There are a lot of reasons why people reside in an apartment.
Yeah, yes. Bill? Agreed. Just let me one point to finish. And my hope is that Jenny can sit down with some of the folks that we've heard from, the owners who are really, for instance, like Mr. Frisch and the owners of the Pines and others who have called. And what is the best solution? What is that fee? And then how does it work for us to make sure that we have the personnel to do that work? And what would that look like? Because I don't know what that base fee would be.
Yeah.
Because right now, the base fee is what, 10,000? I don't have that in front of me.
No, Madam Mayor, the fees we were talking about were like $130 a building and $20 a unit. So for someone who has 171 units, that'd be about $4,000 a year.
Okay.
We intended on bringing you an implementation plan in August, and as part of that, we've been working very closely with Marty on a communications plan. We've been working with the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association for the last 6 weeks or so, and getting their support or their non-opposition to this, and they're there, and Lisa's here tonight. And so we're going to provide you some of that information when we come back to you in August, but we can also put our heads together, and then part of that implementation plan where I'm going is the public hearing process. We have to adopt changes to the ordinance, changes to the fee schedule, so there will be opportunities for input. And our thought was to send emails and postcards to all the current rental licensee owners, and engage them and let them know about this. So that was one thing that we're going to share with you as part of our implementation plan, how we're going to communicate this and engage the property owners. At that time, we can also come back with fee option to still inspect all of the units every 3 years, as you've suggested, and see how we can deal with the fee structure with that type of program, and see what options are there.
Okay. Bill?
Just a real quick comment as you help staff and us think through the problem. Just to give you a brief comment, when this was originally brought to us, staff had over 500 hours of time at a cost to the city, to the citizens, to the tune of $30,000 to $35,000 worth of staff time, even though it has nothing to do with you and most rental homeowners. We certainly didn't believe that the taxpayers of Burnsville should get stuck for that either. And we're just trying to, and along those lines, we're just trying to come up with some workable, fair system. Having said that, that young lady had her hand raised, Mayor.
No, I did not.
Comment as well.
Yeah.
You want to come over here so that people at home can hear you? Okay. And introduce yourself.
I'm Donna Jensen. I'm Community Manager for Rambush Estates and Mobile Home Park.
Okay.
So I do have some rental housing in there, and I just wanted to make some of the comments. I agree with the fee structure can be quite difficult. I have 56 units, so if you only charge me one building fee and not a building fee for every home, I'm okay on the amount on it. But the other part of it is because we did, and the other property in Lakeville did get some of those residents out of some of those communities that did have issues. So part of the thing was that we heard from those residents was the common areas. We didn't have a resident that came to us looking for housing that didn't make mention that your common area wasn't an issue. So that's one thing kind of keeping in mind. Yes, the unit inspection is good, and it also helps us too if there's somebody that has something that hide when we come in, but maybe not when somebody else does. But the common areas, I can't see that there's a property doing everything it should, that their common areas isn't going to be up on par. Somebody who has issues, there's something with the decks, the exterior, the pool area, the hallways. We had a person who said they walked with a flashlight to their third floor apartment every time they went home, who now lives in our other park. So that's one area of inspection. And the other thing is that we found out is that I got an address to a community in Burnsville, but I did not get a rental reference request. So whether or not we're still following procedures and doing our diligence in screening our residents, checking references, and following through. Now, in this particular case, there was nothing to hide, but if that's the case where I'm finding out that other communities in our city are not doing that reference check, how many more they're slipping through the cracks, or where that's going through on that part of it.
And I think that's part of the work that our staff, along with our police officers and our inspectors, are all working through.
So I just wanted to bring it to your attention, but I know with 171 units, because a couple of our other communities have 120, you start adding those $2,000 and $4,000 into your budget in this tight, it makes a huge, it really does a readjustment to how you can do your budget, what you can do for your repairs and maintenance. All of a sudden, you've got every year that $4,000 now you have to come up with, undo that on it, so. So we've got a lot of beautiful communities and a lot of people that do a great job in the park.
And we appreciate, this is the reason why when we have these, we always have the opportunity for you to respond, and also then to work with our staff on finding the best solution that will allow us to make sure that the properties are well taken care of, and that it is safe for our residents.
And then just to clarify how you're gonna, since I'm a mobile home park, how you're gonna classify me?
I think our community development director, Jenny Faulkner, has that answer because she's looked at all of these things.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the council, the draft that was presented to you has mobile home,
Yeah.
or manufactured home parks. They have licenses now.
Yes.
To continue that and then be charged the fee because they are renting out lots. And then any unit that is rented out or an owner that rents out the dwelling would also have to get a separate license because those units then would be considered single-family and need to be inspected.
So
we
it's just
fall
like
under
a,
single family for the rental homes, and then we're per every lot in our park.
That's how it's set up. And I don't know who owns the homes, if it's the park that owns the homes versus a separate individual that owns the homes. But whoever owns the homes would have to get a rental license.
So my homeowners would have to have a,
yes,
Yes.
it's the same
Same
thing
as-
with a condominium or a single-family unit. If a family decides to rent their home, they have to get a rental license.
well, we don't allow rentals in our homeowners. So it would just be the rental homes that the park itself owns that would be assessed the fee
Yeah.
then.
Yes.
Yes, then that's what you do.
I guess I have a question on that,
Yeah,
too. So I buy a mobile home and I go to Rambush and I rent a space there. Do we charge a rental license for that homeowner to rent a space at Rambush?
Councilmember Gustafson, right now, there's no fee.
Okay,
So,
but going forward, are you looking at charging a fee for them to rent a pad from Rambush? Would they own the home? Somebody else owns the home and they're just renting the pad.
correct.
We would charge a fee on that?
The per unit fee of $20 or $30.
Really?
What's there to inspect for a
Yeah.
pad?
Exactly.
Well, there may be common areas, tornado shelters, those kinds of things. There's property maintenance issues with the lots, with the common areas, the private streets, and they're licensed now,
Yeah.
and so we just
And
rolled them into
a whole lot
this.
of pictures that came out of that, and we had some folks.
Yeah,
in here.
hydrant issues.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
Madam Mayor,
Craig,
it sounds like
yeah.
there's consensus building that we're going to look at some sort of an arrangement to give preference to owners who have better track records as time goes by, or at least find some arrangement where we can keep the lower base fees, or keep base fees lower and reflect that in when there are multiple inspections, something like that.
Yeah.
More details on the applications of this, some work with the various owners between now and August, and then return.
that's exactly, that would be great, and I think you will appreciate working with our staff and finding the best solution.
Yes, and one of the other solutions that I was going to suggest was that third-party inspectors, licensed inspectors that do inspections might qualify instead of having the city have that burden. So there's alternatives, I think, to
Yeah.
just shotgunning it.
We've started having that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we started down that road. Yes, Bill?
Just a couple of comments along that way to summarize. We're trying to find a way to regulate as little as possible,
Yeah.
as cheap as possible. And I want you to know, sir, that I did raise with the city attorney as part of that whole discussion, what about third-party inspectors and as part of our investigation, how would they stand up in court? Because ultimately, that's where, will these guys, and our city attorney said it's kind of a mix. His experience has been it's a mix. Some stand up in court. It depends how much experience they have. Are they regular guy? Are they the same company guys that come out to do it? And so that was the next concern because, of course, the first thing not always, but some of the occasional bad apples do is they go to court and they get an injunction, and then you're back presenting evidence, and then you have to pay the inspector, if you will, time for court, et cetera. So we are exploring that. I'm just saying it wasn't as quick fix as I hoped it would be when I raised that issue with the city attorney as well as a solution.
I appreciate your comments about court. I'm an attorney. I've practiced for 50 years and been involved with all kinds of lawsuits, and some are frivolous, some have merit, and we are entitled to our day in court for if we feel that we're being prejudiced of some sort. So I appreciate when we talk about attorneys, we talk about holding them high. There are some that shouldn't be held so high, and we have a lot of lawsuits that are, as I said, frivolous, that don't amount to much, but do postpone a lot of enforcement procedures. So I appreciate where you're coming from. I'm here just to help try to move it along and make sure that people such as myself and other good operators aren't penalized.
Yeah. And
Just
that's
to-
the intent of bringing this up again when you spoke with me about this, is to make sure that we don't penalize, that we, in Burnsville, we always like to say that we have heart and a stick. When you don't do it well, then we're going to have that stick, but we also understand that we embrace those who do good business here and are great owners in our city, so.
Thank you very
And we
much.
appreciate your input and all that you brought to the table. And then, I don't know, Jenny can even give you her telephone number, and you two can have more discussions.
Thank you.
And so, is there anything else? Okay, and I think our staff will bring back some solutions. Thank you, Jenny, and I really appreciate everything that you've done. Okay. That's the end of our roundtable discussion. And so are there any reports to be had this evening? Bill, do you have any?
Other than to say Black Dog canceled itself last meeting, and nothing else of any importance.
Mary?
No report.
Okay.
Nothing
Dan?
for me.
Dan Kay?
2 meetings, MBTA, I wasn't able to attend, but Steve did did a phenomenal job of writing notes. I should just have you do this. A couple items on the agenda they covered with audit results. It was a clean opinion, 2 minor comments that were inconsequential. Beverly's review was up again. We actually MBTA utilizes the Egan HR director again to coordinate that, and we're in that process now. Very interesting, this was kind of a shocker, Southwest Transit, word is they're considering backing out of STA, which I thought was very interesting. They had very hard feelings at the last session, questioning the effectiveness of STA. I think they were, of course, big supporters of Southwest Rail.
Yeah,
And,
so they were unhappy because that didn't go through?
Yeah, and
That's
you know,
not
my,
much they can do when you
No.
look at what's been going on.
well, and the only leverage they have is the SDA, so why would they back out of and give up the only stick they have? Really, I mean, a bigger stick. So, interesting, I'll follow up on that and see where it goes at the next meeting. I-35 Solutions. Oh, Liz is gone. I thought she's there. They unveiled a new website. It's www.35wsolutions.com. Looks great. We had a guest speaker, Frank Hornstein and Senator Scott Dibbles. Senator Dibbles' comments were disappointing that I-35 corridor was not in the bonding. Also very disappointed the Southwest Rail didn't pass. Feels the partisanship divide on transportation came after the veto override, previous governor. And everyone noted that the Lake Street Station is the weak link in getting a corridor, the I-35 corridor, completed. Drawn some attention to this and hoping that this will help raise its priorities. And that is the big thorn, and has been in all the discussions, that a Lake Street Station seems to be, as I said, the thorn in the side of getting that whole project done as far as a station-to-station bus service down I-35, which would come, I'll be down to Burnsville, of course. Cedar Avenue corridor with MBTA, Apple Valley still holding the BRT and MBTA hostage for a pedestrian bridge crossing 147th. Apple Valley Council level delays put BRT service launch into 2013 instead of this fall. No one's happy about that, and it's caused quite a big ruckus. And the I-35 Solutions budget for 2013 is $48,000. Last year was $47,000. Pretty much all of it goes to lobbying, so some pretty fun stuff. That's it. There's no board meeting with the garage this time of year. They're off for the summer, and that's it.
Okay. I have 3 areas to report on. The International Festival Even though with the rain, we were able to move it into the Performing Arts Center, and it went well. And people still enjoyed the performance that went on. The wrap-up will be tomorrow. The Burnsville Convention and Visitors Bureau, we had a full-day retreat looking strategically into the future. And we also had the road rally for Rand McNally and USA Today. And so we had the judges here, and I can tell you that the restaurateurs in Burnsville are the best. They put out their best show, and they showed the cuisine that Burnsville has to offer. And we put out, the restaurants that we visited were all independently owned, because that's one of Burnsville's strengths, is that we have a lot of great restaurants, and they're all independently owned, and the people are local, whether Burnsville or Lakeville is where they live. So that was great, or Rosemount, but south of the river. And that went well. We won't know until the 25th where we stand, but we had some very tough competition. But that went well. The Regional Council of Mayors, we had a report and a presentation by the Tax Commission on how Minnesota has its taxing structure and how very, very complicated it is. And they showed the same slide where it falls down into all of these categories. And so the thing is that they're going to have to do some reform. But we talk about reforming or just doing away and make it simpler so people could understand. But I don't know where that's going to go. It's always a great way to look at things. And then there was also a report from the Met Council. There were hearings going on throughout our metropolitan area, because the Met Council would like to have feedback on how to make the metropolitan area thrive. We look at transportation systems, and would that be an area that we need to look at in terms of making our metropolitan area more attractive to businesses to come, and how do we do that, and how do we move forward? So there were a lot of different areas that they wanted people to look at, but they're going to be going out and having town hall meetings to get feedback about how do we make our metropolitan area thrive. And so, but the Municipal Legislative Commission meetings, those are all coming up now between July, August, and September, and so those meetings haven't started yet. They're already in all of our calendars, along with the metropolitan, Metro Cities policy piece. That's it? Okay, and if there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Now you get